Our centers, at Howard and Georgetown, have hosted workshops to introduce educators to outstanding books about our respective world areas, which often, overlap, as they do this year, with regard to Listen Layla, which is set in the predominantly Arabic-speaking North African country of Sudan. And now I'll ask Dr. Douglas and Dr. Bond to introduce themselves.
Dr. Bond, would you like to, since you're also at Howard University, and then I will go.
Yes, I'd like to say welcome to all our listening and viewing audience. My name is Dr. Helen Bond. I'm a professor at Howard University. I'm also the liaison to the Center for African Studies. This is our 8th annual, so it's wonderful to have sustained such a wonderful program. I'd like to say hello and thank you to all of my students who will hopefully be joining us today. And so to thank you to all and look forward to the program. Dr. Douglas.
Yes, thank you very much, Helen. It's really been a thrill to work with you both for many years, and with Vanessa, who's also here. And I'm from the 2 centers at Georgetown, the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies and the Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, where we run a collaborative education outreach program. And as Brenda stated, we are a National Resource Center under Title VI with funding from the Department of Education on the Middle East and North Africa, and are in close collaboration with, since the pandemic, as a matter of fact, in very close collaboration with other 100 and some NRCs that are out there. So I'm thrilled to also mention that this is also an effort to highlight 2 book awards of the 5 major book awards that are out there for children and youth literature. Of course, Brenda, who is the founder of the Children's Africana Book Award, and in my side, it is the Middle East Outreach Council, which has been running for quite a number of years. And we are all, those 2 awards are also part of a larger initiative, the World Area Book Awards, which covers 5 major world areas. So I'm also very excited to continue with the program, and I see many people are coming in here as we begin, and I will turn the program then back over to Brenda.
Thank you. And forgive me, I said I was the co-director of outreach, and also the other co-director is Vanessa Oyugi, who is on maternity leave right now. We are just thrilled that the author of Listen Layla is here virtually to kick off our 2023 workshop. Yasmin Abdel Majid is a Sudanese Australian writer, and as she calls herself, a recovering mechanical engineer. And she's an award-winning social advocate who writes and speaks on politics, society, culture, and technology. She has published 3 books with Penguin Random House, who published Listen Layla, including 2 middle school novels, You Must Be Layla, which is the first one, and as I said, Listen Layla, which won our Children's Africana Book Honor Award last year. And I learned she's now adapting these for the screen. That's wonderful, Yasmin. She's also developing a slate of projects for the stage and the screen. A globally sought after advisor on issues at their intersections of race, gender, and faith, Yasmin has spoken in over 25 countries on social justice and inclusive leadership. She founded her first organization, Youth Without Borders, at the age of 16, leading it for 9 years before co-founding 2 other organizations focused on serving women of color. Her TED Talk, What Does My Headscarf Mean to You?, has been viewed by over 2.5 million viewers and was selected as one of TED's top 10 ideas. If you have not seen it after this program, definitely go look at that TED Talk. It's amazing. In all of her work, Yasmin is an advocate for transformative justice and a fairer, safer world for all. You can read her extensive and impressive biography on her homepage, yasmin.com. I hope I got that all right. So, Yasmin, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Brenda, and good morning, everybody. And thank you for the 2 centers from Howard and Georgetown for having me along. And I'm very, very excited to be doing this workshop with you. So we have about 45, 50 minutes together. I'm going to share my screen here. And what we're going to do is I'll tell you a little bit about myself, about the book, Listen Layla. I'm going to read a small section for you. And then I'm going to actually show you a little bit about Sudan, because Sudan is a place that, well, actually, maybe let's find out what you know about Sudan. If you have the chat in front of you, what I would love is if you know anything about Sudan, what your experiences of Sudan are, just drop a few notes in the chat and let's see what everybody knows about Sudan. Now, what you're seeing on the screen is a couple of the different books I've written that I just wanted to share. And this book, Stand Up and Speak Out Against Racism, is coming out later in the year, but we are here to talk about Listen Layla. So let me read you a small section really quickly from Listen Layla, and just to make sure, if everybody can make sure their microphone is muted, because sometimes that will interrupt the reading, if that's all right. Thank you very, very much. I will read you a little section, tell you a little bit about the book, and then we'll go from there. So this is from chapter 6. Layla had been back to Sudan before Karim and Fadia, her parents, believed it was, sorry, let me start again. Layla had been back to Sudan before, Karim and Fadia, her parents, believing it was important that the kids stay connected to their culture. But the last time they'd been to Khartoum was 5 years ago. She had still been a kid. She didn't know what to expect this time, but there was no time to dwell. The family was up early and on their way to the airport at the crack of dawn. Layla barely registered her surroundings as the family stood in queue after queue, eventually boarding their flight for the first leg. Look how big these screens are, Layla. The twins were beside themselves with excitement at getting a TV each, playing with the screen on the back of the seat in front of them. The unlimited range of shows and games kept Layla and her siblings entertained for the duration of the 13 or so hours to the brightly lit high-rise city in the Middle East. Briefly, Layla could forget that they were flying back to Sudan to see her sick grandmother. In the confines of the airplane, she could pretend that she was going anywhere. She was anyone. This is what it would be like when I'm going to Paris. The thought brought a smile to her face and made her even more sure that she needed to figure out a way to keep her grand design Turismo plans on track. Tea or coffee? The flight attendant asked Fadia and Karim, who both asked for tea. Coffee, please, said Sammy, her 6-year-old brother, as he extended his short little arm holding a plastic white cup. The Scandinavian flight attendant tittered, looking at Fadia. Their mom shook her head. Juice only, she said, and Sammy didn't know the difference. The second leg of the flight was full of Sudanese travelers, either visiting family or returning from holiday, and everyone on the plane talked about going home. Home. Layla wasn't sure whether Sudan was home, really. She liked going back to Sudan, but home didn't really feel like the right description. Some parts of it felt homely, like stories around the dinner table with Habouba Samira, being told off by Amma Bilqis for climbing over the house walls, giggling with her cousin Yusra over board games and Bollywood films, smiles and sweets from the neighbors. But did all of those things together make a home? And if Sudan wasn't her home, did that make her not Sudanese? Do you feel like Sudan is home? She asked her older brother Ozzy, interrupting him from a game. He looked at her annoyed. Nah, it's not. It's just where we're from, that's all. Ozzy turned his attention back to the game. So unhelpful, wow. Where we are from? Layla had always told people that she was from Brisbane in Australia. She sighed. What use were older brothers anyway? What about you, Baba? She asked her father, who was listening in on their conversation. Karim sighed. Sudan will always be home for Mama and me, Habiba. You kids have to decide on where home is yourselves. Decide ourselves? That seems like a lot of responsibility. Layla slept for the 4 or so hours from Dubai to the Sudanese capital, Khartoum. As the plane's wheels made smooth contact with the runway, Layla was jolted awake by the thud. The whispers of hundreds of alhamdulillahs filled the air, prayers of thanks to God for their safe arrival. Being surrounded by people who said the same things as her made Layla wonder if that was what home felt like. People started standing up and clapping, smiling and talking to each other about Sudan's bright future. That's weird. Layla didn't remember that happening the last time they flew to Sudan. She looked over at her brothers, who had also stood up and joined in with the clapping. Sammy and Yusuf weren't going to be much help, but maybe Ozzy could explain. What's going on? Layla asked. They're celebrating the revolution, Ozzy replied, in the most genuinely nice tone Layla had ever heard him use, ever. I don't know what he's talking about, but this revolution thing must be pretty magical if it can make my too cool for school Ozzy sound nice. Fadia was on the phone almost immediately, switching off airplane mode, putting a new SIM card in and calling all her siblings. Aha ya shabab, احنا وصلنا, she heard her mother say to someone, presumably the eldest of her siblings, Marwan. Folks all around them were calling their family members, reporting they'd landed safely, catching up on the news, gossiping about the flight. Layla pondered on the cultural difference of people calling rather than texting as she went to check her phone, then remembered she didn't have a Sudanese SIM card, so she couldn't get any messages. Without a working phone to distract her, Layla craned her neck to see over the seats, taking everything in. The plane was full of families. There were men of all sizes, ages, and shades, wearing white jalabiyas topped with a larger imma, the large, white, classically Sudanese turban on their heads. The women almost all wore colorful thobes, complementing their outfits with henna-decorated hands and feet. Some of the women appeared to have dipped the tips of their fingers in dark red ink, while others had exquisite black patterns of flowers and shapes drawn all over their arms and feet, like the pattern on walls of the most beautiful mosques. Kids were dressed in their travel best, in cute suits and puffy dresses, all prim and proper for the long-haul journey. Layla could not have been in a more different environment than her Grand Design Turismo team meeting she had gone to less than 48 hours earlier. Wild. All right, I'll stop there. So that's just a little excerpt of Layla essentially being whisked away from her family home in Brisbane, Australia. And let me just see if I'll switch on the slide. So yes, so Layla grew up where I grew up, in a town called Brisbane, Australia, in a state called Queensland, which I didn't realize at the time, but when I was growing up in the 90s, the state of Queensland was a little bit like, let's say, the state of Florida in terms of its politics and the kinds of people that lived there. So, my family was the second Sudanese family that moved to Brisbane in the early 90s. And the next Sudanese family didn't move till 10 years later. So, we were, as they say, the only Sudanese in the village, as it were. And part of why I wanted to write this Layla series, You Must Be Layla and Listen Layla, was because I wanted to, like many authors do, I think, insert myself into the narrative, insert the stories of Sudanese people into the canon. Quite often we hear, when people talk about Sudan, and I'm going to see if I can see the chat. Oh yeah, we've got my understanding of Sudan comes from contemporary perspective, the racial ethnic strife. Thank you, Erica. Oh, we've got Natalie saying that the pyramids are there, not just in Egypt. Very, very, very true. And I'll talk about the pyramids shortly. And A Long Walk to Water. I teach this in the history of Sudan to my middle school students. Fantastic. Thank you, Mario. I mean, it's true. I think a lot of contemporary literature about Sudan tends to talk about the conflict because, well, the various conflicts we've had in Sudan, unfortunately, quite a history of conflict. It was, and I'll talk very briefly about the history in just a moment, but as important as those conflicts are, and as important as much as they shaped my experiences and the experiences of my family and many, many, many Sudanese people, as you will all know, conflicts are not the only things that make up a life. They're not the only thing that define a culture. And what I wanted to do was show what the life of a Sudanese family was like in an everyday context. Yes, you've got this conflict in the background and you've got a revolution happening in the background, but also what are their family like? What are the interactions between, the siblings and the cousins? And what happens when you take a girl, a 14-year-old character, so Layla's 14 in this book, and you take her back to Sudan, to Khartoum, because her grandmother is sick, and at a time where there's a lot of change. How does that play out? And when Layla gets to Sudan, she doesn't know actually anything about the revolution that's going on. And I actually also set this book in the time of the 2018-2019 revolution, which again, I'll talk about shortly, because I also wanted to make it, one of the things that Layla does is she starts to, as she learns about the revolution going on in Sudan, she starts to connect it with civil rights fights and, you know, fights against injustice that are happening back in Brisbane. And I think that's something as well that, you know, I have heard teachers often talk about how we connect. If you're a kid of the diaspora, how do you connect what's going on, you know, back home, quote unquote, with what's going on where you're living now? And there are always connections. But Layla is a kid like many 14-year-old kids who's impulsive, who, you know, she's just a little inventor. She wants to invent something, and she's part of this invention team, and they've got this big award. And so the driving element of the story is also her trying to be involved in this invention competition while she's in Sudan, even though her father has told her not to. So there's a lot of different things going on. But before I talk a little bit more about Layla and those themes, I just wanted to share a little bit more about Sudan in a way that you might not have seen. So I'm going to share a short video. Oh, actually, we've got some photos first. Somebody mentioned, I think it was Natalie mentioned the pyramids. Yes, if you can see here, we have more pyramids than Egypt, which is something that I like to tell everybody about Sudan. Over, you know, a few hundred pyramids. They're not as large as the pyramids in Giza, but they're definitely very, very impressive. And also Khartoum, where I was born, was where the two Niles meet. So you've got the Blue Nile and the White Nile, and they meet in the center of the capital city, Khartoum. And it's a beautiful sight. If you ever get the opportunity to travel to Sudan, you can actually see the different colors of the rivers and how they sort of come together as they meet. But here I'm going to play. So this video was made by a friend of mine, actually, a Sudanese artist and creator. She's based in the Middle East, but she wrote this love letter to Sudan. And everything in this video has been made by Sudanese people, shot in Sudan. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear the sounds. Great.
سوداني بلدي عجباني المروي الكرري سلامي توبو عراقي لذي بلادي ركشة في شكل فراري عبري مالي الصواني شيء بالصك الصحب منتهي بنمله تاني جبنة بدون دواء نشرب جبنة بدون دواء جبنة بدون دواء جبنة بدون دواء يا عديلة يا بيضة يا ولاي كثير معاه الليلة شو يوم باقي دور طلع يا عديلة يا بيضة يا ولاي كثير معاه الليلة شو يوم باقي وبعد ده كله تجي واحدة تقول لي عن جد انتي سودانية مبين عليكي عادي أول مرة تشوفي ناس ملخبطين 17 ولاية كلنا سودانيين نسمع شر حبيب في الشارع مين مكروزين في ترفاع بالبلد تعالينا في البلد ناكل دوم ونبت ممكن تسكن للأبد ممكن تسكن للأبد بيترفع للأبد
بارك فيك بارك فيك سلمك بارك فيك سلمك بارك فيك سلمك بارك فيك بارك فيك بارك فيك سلمك بارك فيك سلمك بارك فيك سلمك بارك فيك
هويا هناي يسمع بجاي أنا مايا هتعور ساير ردد معاي سوداني 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 بعاي بفوت واقفة براي
يا سايقك معاي الشمس بيسخن غداي وانا الجو ظابط معايا والله كده دقيقة يا ابو جعفر ثبت واقف من فوق كاشف الحوش كملك من كوش هو يا بيت هوك خليني اخلص كلامي واتخارج انا لي اسبوع ما اخذ علي دوش عمجغ وادي جنبك عمك بالنادي هو عمك ما فهمت اسال جنبك سوداني دقاري محنك اي رابر شافني جرى براب على كيفي حتى مع ما هو كلام يدخى اوفر راستا بارك فيك بارك فيك سلمك بارك فيك سلمك بارك فيك سلمك بارك فيك بارك فيك بارك فيك سلمك بارك فيك سلمك بارك فيك سلمك بارك فيك بارك فيك سلمك بارك فيك سلم بارك فيك سلمك بارك فيك بارك فيك سلمك بارك فيك سلمك بارك فيك سلمك بارك فيك
The entirety of this project is 100% Sudani product, made in Sudan by Sudanese to the world with love. I showed you my culture. Now it's time to show me yours.
All right. I hope you all enjoyed that. Please let me know in the chat if you did. I really love sharing this video because I think, you know, Maha does a really great job of showing a variety of different aspects of Sudanese culture. Oh, great to see that you all loved it. And also, it's mostly in Arabic. Now, let's talk a little bit about the history of Sudan. So, sort of ancient, you might know of ancient Nubian like history and so on. Like where Nubia is in southern Egypt, but quite a lot of it is actually also in North Sudan. So quite a lot of, you know, when we hear about the kingdom of Kush and these sorts of histories, a lot of that was actually in the northern, what is today northern Sudan. Of course, you know, pre-colonial times and so on, these borders were quite different, or they might not have existed at all. But, you know, that whole region was quite a powerful historical city and I don't know if you could use the word empire, but certainly civilization. And I talk about this a little bit in Listen Layla as well. There's a point where the grandma, Haboba, which is what we would call grandma in Sudan, you know, she's trying to give Layla some wisdom, some insight, trying to connect her to her history. And she tells Layla about some of these, you know, queens of the kingdom of Kush, or the queendom of Kush, maybe we should say, and the matriarchal societies that they ran and so forth. So I tried to bring some of that into the story, and that's a great, you know, place for readers to start to learn about that ancient history. But if we fast forward, essentially Sudan was colonized by the British, but the way that it's an interesting relationship because it was actually also partly run by the Egyptians. So you kind of had the Egyptians running Sudan on behalf of the British. And so you kind of had the influence of Egyptian like imperial power as well as the British. And that was from about the 1800s. You fast forward, we got independence. And I should also mention, pre the British, you also had, you know, Ottoman influence and Arab influence. So Sudan's a really interesting place because Sudan itself, the word is technically means the land of the blacks, or however, like the relationship that a lot of people have with the idea of blackness and the idea of Arabness is really complicated and complex in Sudan. And that's why it's a really interesting country to study and to engage with, because some people, you know, in contemporary Sudan today will really lean into the idea of being considered black, whereas others sort of want to be more Arab facing and sort of tied to the Arabophone region. So it's interesting. Some Sudanese will consider themselves black and Arab, some will consider themselves black, not Arab, some will consider them Arab, not black. And this is a really interesting kind of space, right? And I tried to touch a little bit of, I sort of lightly touch on this in Listen Layla, but it's an interesting conversation. I think it's an interesting conversation opener for children, because especially if you think of, these identities as very fixed, it challenges those ideas of fixed identity. And Layla herself, the character, she has to engage with this as she goes into Sudan, and she also has to engage with it as she goes back to Australia, where Blackness is quite different in Australia as well. The Indigenous people in Australia call themselves Black. And so she has to start thinking about, okay, this happens towards the end of the book. She has to start thinking about, okay, well, if I am in Australia and the Indigenous, the First Nations people here in Australia, they see me as, a settler, how does that make me feel? How do I engage with this sort of challenge? And so, we're introducing these kind of complex ideas to Layla in a way that she can understand, and hopefully in a way that the kids also will be able to understand. So Sudan gets independence from the Brits in 1956. The challenge then has been since 1956, there have been successive coups. So typically what happens is you'll have a couple of years of democratically elected or civilian government, and then you'll have a coup, and then you'll have military leadership. And that has kind of repeated over and over and over. So my family left Sudan in 1992 after the military coup of Omar al-Bashir, who then stayed in power for about 30 years. And in 2018, in December 2018, a new sort of wave of protests. I mean, Omar al-Bashir was particularly, like many dictators, was particularly cruel and harsh and oppressive. And people had been, resisting in small ways and in large ways. Like when I lived in Sudan in 2012 with my grandmother after university. I sort of went back and my grandma said, we're going to teach you how to cook so you can find yourself a husband. And I was like, but what about my personality? And she was like, don't be ridiculous. That's not going to get you a husband. And so, I went and stayed with my grandma for about 6 months. And it was during the post-Arab Spring era. Egypt had just gone through a big revolution. A lot of other places in the region had, and Sudan was also trying to do the same. But the protests there were quashed, and protests, tried over a number of years. But then in late 2018, they really they stuck. And in mid-2019, over the sort of 6 months, you saw a wave of resistance, non-violent resistance. And I want to share, let's see if I was going to share a video about the pyramids, but I think I can just share this presentation with you later. The pyramids are great. This video is a very sweet video of a young American traveler who's I think his goal is to travel to every different country in the world. And he gets to Sudan and he's like, everyone's so friendly. And it's partly because we get no tourists at all. There are very, very few tourists in Sudan. When I got married in February 2020 in Sudan and brought some of my English and American and Australian friends, the embassy knew about my wedding because all of a sudden all these people were applying for visas, and anytime one of my friends would arrive at the embassy, they'd be like, oh, you're going to that wedding, no problem, we'll sort your visa out straight away. So but yes, we can come back to this video slightly later. I wanted to share this revolution video. There will be Arabic and there will also be some translation in English because the singer does a little bit in English, but partly because it shows some of the photos and I guess also I think this movement was about a year before what we would see as like the post the resurgence of Black Lives Matter after the murder of George Floyd, and I think a lot of Sudanese people in the diaspora and in Sudan feel kind of connected to these broad movements of resistance. However, I would say Sudan is definitely one of the places where getting attention is half the battle from people around the world. So like, when the revolution kicked off in 2018, part of my role as somebody in the diaspora who had access to a media platform was literally getting people to know about it. But, it was such an inspiring resistance movement, you know, we were able to get people to sort of change their profile pictures to blue for Sudan. We were able to, and the blue that you'll see in this video is also like a very specific blue tied to kind of honoring the martyrs who were killed. And the one other thing I will say is, you know, this revolution, again, like part of what I wanted to do with Listen Layla was put this character, this Australian Sudanese diaspora character, right in the heart of this and be like, what is it like for a kid like that to understand something as, you know, as transformative as a revolution, a nonviolent revolution against armed military dictatorship, and also the cost of it. My cousin Ma'ab was shot and killed during the protests, and I also have, you know, a character named Ma'ab in the book who kind of is modeled after my cousin. Ma'ab, actually, my cousin, bless him, he had first been shot and injured in his leg, and his mother was very relieved that he'd survived, but he continued to protest and unfortunately lost his life to the protests. But I also wanted to include that in the book, not in a way that is gratuitous by any means, because it's still a book that's appropriate for children, but in a way that really drove home to Layla, like this was no game, this was not a joke, this was people really, you know, willing to put their lives on the line. And it was actually quite scary. And even though she, you know, wanted to be a part of it, she had to kind of learn how to take that quite seriously. So let's share this last video with you. Oh, sorry. I'm not sure what happened. Let's come back. I'm just going to pause here to point something out in this video. So ما راجع أنا لي مطالب essentially means I'm not going home, I have demands. And that's kind of the thing that the people wanted to talk about. One of the challenges the revolutionaries had was the government cut off internet. And so what communities started to do is they would hold local community sessions where they invited everyone in the neighborhood to come together. And it's almost like an old school consciousness raising kind of, you know, community effort. People would come, they would talk, they would, you know, you would have one or two leaders get up and essentially share, you know, from the local resistance committee what their plan was, because they literally had no way to let people know when a protest would be. So they would have a very regular kind of consciousness raising meetup. And it was a really localized effort across the country. And I think, you know, the Sudanese people really had to learn how to build those collectivist networks again in a way that, you know, that I think a lot of young people today are learning. You know, how do we build that collective power, especially under challenges like not having internet connectivity and so on. And also that was actually, I forgot to mention, a big part of why, you know, us in the diaspora had to sort of get the word out, because people literally didn't have internet. They didn't have the ability to tell folks what was going on the ground. And so this was part of it.
جيبوا حكومة الحكم المدني ودم الكوز الكتل الطالي الناس ملكوا وقفوا في وش المدفع ثوار هدفوا قالوا نحن ما بنرجع بناتنا قدام كل موكب يطلع ثوار أحرار لحكم العسكر ما بنخضع. It's dream a reality. It's really simple, all we want is justice. No violence and brutality. We fight together and we march together for peace and equality.
All right, I'll pause it there. But yeah, I think, you know, these, let me just bring this presentation back up. There were all sorts of songs and chants and quite a lot of revolutionary music that came out of that period, actually. And that's also something that I think, you know, when I've talked to young people and when I've shared the book, I've encouraged people to go out and find, because, you know, music and so on is actually quite a big part of the Sudanese culture. And that was really, you know, and the chants were really a way for people to kind of connect to what was going on. And there's also a video that I can share with you all that sort of translated all of these revolutionary chants and songs into English for folks in the diaspora to understand. But the last thing that I'll mention is so there's an element in Listen Layla where she goes to where there's this kind of big sit-in, and it's again a reflection of, there was a 1 million person march. So the Millionia was a march of, they wanted, you know, the organizers wanted as many people out on the streets as possible, and they were marching towards the military headquarters where there, you know, had been a sit-in, and this sit-in was reflected, or was a reflection of an existing sit-in that did actually happen from early April to the 3rd of June in 2019. And, you know, it's a wonderful, it kind of in a way reminds, you know, in some ways it's almost like the sense of Occupy Wall Street. It was the Sudanese people trying to kind of create this new society in this place and say that we're going to build the kind of world that we want. We're going to build the Sudan that we want right here in the military headquarters. We're not going to leave. And so they set up schools, they set up health clinics. There was music and dancing and consciousness raising sessions. And it was, you know, there's a lot of content out there about it as well, but it's such a beautiful, I think, illustration of what the Sudanese people actually wanted themselves and the kind of thing they were working for. And unfortunately, there was a massacre on the 3rd of June, which was the last day of Ramadan, the last day of the month of fasting, which cleared out the sit-in. And then the millions people marches began after that as a way to also honor the lives of the people that had been lost. And also, like, you know, June 30 was one of the big million people march. Over 50 cities around the world also had versions of Millionaires, and, you know, it also sort of came out in solidarity. Anyway, I'm talking quite a lot about the revolution, and, you know, and it's a challenge, because I think that, you know, in part what I wanted to do with Listen Layla was to sort of, yes, Sudan is not all about war and conflict. You know, I wanted to show the culture, I wanted to show the nuance, but it cannot be denied that that has played quite a role and is still a live issue in the lives of people, even if it's not right at the front of it, right? Most of the book isn't actually about the revolution. Most of the book is about Layla's relationship with her cousin, and the fact that her cousin, you know, has 2 boyfriends on the side, but, you know, and doesn't want to talk about it. And Layla's like, what do you mean? I thought we weren't allowed to have boyfriends. And, you know, and the kind of challenges of coming back, you know, and navigating gender roles and expectations and all these sorts of things. So that is really at the forefront. And at the same time, we've got this kind of background of much bigger political issues going on. So ultimately, like the themes that I was really interested in exploring were the way that politics plays out in the lives of young people, you know, from the diaspora, young Black kids, Muslim kids, and so on. And I wanted to look at how race plays out, especially in different contexts, you know, whether it's Sudan, whether it's Australia, and how, you know, Sudan is a country with many different racial groups, and, you know, a complex relationship with, you know, colorism is a real challenge in Sudan, because, you know, because we have people of every shade, you know, that they have the historical colonization from Arabs and from Brits kind of has left a really tragic colorism challenge. And also, you know, the idea of identity and family, and really linking that all to the experience of the diaspora. And ultimately, Layla, you know, as funny and as impulsive and as obsessed with inventing as she is, you know, she's also trying to figure out who she is. So, you know, that coming of age story across continents is what this book was kind of all about. So we have about 10 minutes, 9 minutes or so, and I wanted to kind of open it up for questions, any sorts of questions that you may have. I hope this has been, and feel free to come on video if you feel like you would like to, but yeah, I would love to hear from you.
Yes, and thank you, Yasmin, for that just informative and such a lively presentation and look at Sudan and listen, Layla. And I want to stress the inviting part of this. You know, one of our outreach people always would say to teachers, if at the end of your teaching of a particular country in Africa, the students don't want to go there, you need to rethink what you're teaching. So this is exactly what you've done. And I think Dr. Helen Bond is going to help out with the Q&A. Helen, do you want to talk about how people can put things in the chat, or they can just speak out? I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure, thank you so much. If there's any questions, we hope that there are questions from the audience. Please feel free to put those questions in the chat, or you can unmute and actually ask your questions. To get started, since we have a lot of pre-service teachers in our group today. And by the way, I just wanted to say I was just really enthralled with the video showing the young woman rapping, and you could see all the cross-cultural connections. And how might you use some of these cross-cultural connections? And I also put in the chat about how some of them were actually dispelling the stereotypes. How might you actually use these ideas in the classroom?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, Dr. Bond. I think for me, you know, there's kind of two different challenges when it comes to a country like Sudan. One is people not knowing anything about it at all. So you're kind of dealing with a blank canvas. You know, they wouldn't be able to point it out on a map. They wouldn't be able to give you any kind of history. The other being like they've only heard about it through the prism of war and warfare and Darfur and so on. So I think, you know, for teachers, the first thing is to try figure out like where kids are coming from when it comes to a country like Sudan, and then kind of build from there. If it's okay, they only have seen it through the prism of war, well then can we start with, you know, what is very different to that? All right, can we show them videos about the music and the food and so on in a way that will kind of open their eyes to what the average person is thinking about and how they're living? And also I would say connect, and I don't know if how this works, but sort of talk about, well, okay, we could also think of the United States in that way. Like people outside America might look at what's going on here and only have one idea of it. But of course, that might not be what your day-to-day life is like. So if you're trying to kind of bring it back to that individual kid, that individual child or student, and be like, okay, what do you do in your day-to-day? And how might a kid in Sudan do that in their day-to-day? And if they don't know, maybe then they can kind of go and find out, what do they have for breakfast? You know, kind of starting it out like that. And then if they don't know anything at all, I think what's really fun is, you know, the diversity of a country like Sudan, kind of in terms of its language, its landscape, and so on, is a really fun place to start. Because, you know, as mentioned and as seen in the video, there are 17 different states. There are all sorts of different landscapes. You know, if you're doing marine biology, there is beautiful scuba diving, and like the Red Sea borders, you know, Sudan. And so you could kind of start there and be like, okay, one of the most, because so few people travel to Sudan, it is one of the most kind of pristine diving areas and coral regions, right? So you could kind of start there and be like, okay, what kind of fish might you find there, and build out from there. So I think finding ways and honestly using a lot of the Sudanese people are all ambassadors for Sudan, for better or for worse, and so they have made quite a lot of content on YouTube, and so there's really quite a lot that you could find. And as I said, I'm happy to share this presentation. So if people, you know, or I think even just something as simple as like the chants and seeing how similar the protest chants are in Sudan and the protest chants might be in the United States, I think is an interesting place to start, to kind of be like, we're all kind of, you know, in the same fight for freedom.
That's really a great connection. Let's look at our chat to see if anyone has dropped any questions. Okay. I'd like to invite my students to ask questions if they have any questions. If anyone would like to unmute their microphones and speak, we're also welcome for that. You're also welcome to raise your hand, although I can't see the entire screen. I really did. I love it.
We have Erica.
Wonderful.
Hi, Erica.
Hello. So I'm not a student. I'm actually a writer myself. And thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. It just, my mind was like, I mean, I know I look the same, but my mind is actually blown. You know, because I realized that as a person who really tries to know so much about so many things, I knew so little. And so I really appreciate how you have chosen to approach sort of opening up young people's world to a place that they may not know anything about or much about through the eyes of this 14-year-old girl. And then just sort of tackle, you know, some of the issues, but within the context of real life, because that's you know, that's a place that they understand. So I really appreciate what you shared here. And I'm actually curious, you mentioned, or someone mentioned in your introduction, that you are a quote unquote recovering mechanical engineer. I'm curious what prompted the shift to writing, or you know, and how your background in mechanical engineering even informs what you do or how you approach your research or just anything like that.
Thank you. Thanks, Erica. Yes, I am. I always say that once an engineer, always an engineer, no matter how many years you've left the industry for. So I'll start with the second question first. So Layla is a total engineering nerd. You know, she's an inventor, and I really wanted her to. I mean, there's a lot more of it in the first book, where she has to invent something in order to kind of prove her place at the school. But in this book, you know, the invention, she tries to make an invention to help with the revolution, right? And it's completely misplaced, and it makes no sense at all. But you know, she approaches life from like, if I can fix this, if I can build something to fix this problem, then, you know, then that's what we should do. Without, you know, and one of the lessons that she learns here is also that she kind of has to listen to the people around her, right? She can't just come in and like bullshitly be like, oh, I've got a solution to your problem, right? Like, she actually has to pay attention, which is, I think, a lesson that many of us, regardless of what age we are, can learn. And for me personally, I mean, I started writing a blog like everybody did in the 2010s. And I was working in oil and gas on a drilling platform, about my experiences out there on the drilling platform. And off the back of that, I got invited to start writing essays and so on. But unfortunately, the reality is, Erica, is that the company I was working for said to me that you can either choose to write books or be an engineer. You can't be both. And so I ended up kind of taking a year off to see how it would go, and then, you know, the rest is history. So I mean, I cannot tell you how far my life is now from what I imagined it was when I was Layla's age. I definitely thought I was going to be a little science nerd my whole life, but now I just write about characters who are science nerds.
Tremendous. Thank you.
Thank you. How are we doing for time?
We have, if we can squeeze one more in, I have one of my students with their hands raised. Jada Carter, thank you.
Hello, Dr. Vaughn. Hello, how you doing?
Hi.
Yes, my name is Jada Carter. I'm a freshman elementary education major from Memphis, Tennessee. That's not like a little Howard intro, but yeah. So my question was pertaining to the video we just watched, the lyric video, and he kept like repeating a phrase. You mentioned like the translation, but I just wanted to ask you what was the translation, and what's the significance of using both English and what was the other language that
Arabic.
they were speaking? Arabic.
Yeah.
What's the significance of them using both English and Arabic throughout both the lyric video that we watched previously and the love letter to Sudan?
Thank you. Great question, Jada. So the significance is quite simple in that I think quite a lot of the musicians that we heard from are actually from the diaspora. So they're people that tend to live outside Sudan. Maybe they live in the Middle East, in the Emirates, or maybe they live in, I think, yeah, one lived in Qatar. The other lived in Dubai or Abu Dhabi. So like they kind of live outside. And so they use Arabic and English because they understand or they believe that they'll be able to reach a wider audience. That's honestly a big part of it, because I think there are quite a lot of, you know, Arabic only videos, but that doesn't reach as many people. It sort of stays in the Arab speaking world. The thing that the song repeated in the lyric video, and I'm really glad that you raised it, it's ما راجعنا ليه مطالب. It's like it translates to, I'm not going home, I have demands, right? And I'm like, I'm not going home, I'm going to stay out on these streets, I have demands from the government, you know, from the state. جيبوا حكومة مدني, like bring a civilian government, not a military government. And they sort of refer to the, like, the military who killed students, because quite a lot of the people that they killed were students. Now that those lyrics are the literal chants that people were saying out on the streets. Like, I'm not going home, we're not going home, we have demands, we're not going home, we have demands. Like, we're not going home until, you know, our demands are met, until the government falls, until the whole regime falls. And so it was, you know, a way to kind of bring that demand, you know, into people's homes, you know, all over the world. So yeah, and classrooms, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much again, Yasmin, for that wonderful presentation. So we're going to make a transition now. I hope that I can share my screen and talk just for a few minutes about instructional strategies for Listen Layla and Sudan. So let's see. Oh, let's see. I see. So I'm having the problem that I see many people have when they're online and they can't see the link to start their video, to start their PowerPoint. Anybody have a suggestion?
Brenda, if you'd like to send me the PowerPoint and make
Oh,
multiple
yeah,
sharing.
Susan has it. I just can't see the part at the bottom where I can start the, you know, transition from this. And maybe I can do it up here somewhere. Does anybody know how to do that?
Click on Zoom. Can you find your Zoom icon?
Yeah.
Click on that.
Okay. That's not it.
Maybe just press escape. Were you in presentation mode when you went into it?
I wasn't. So
I'm not sure.
maybe it's up
I
here.
can run it from it.
Well, we
if
can
you'd
see
like.
we can see your presentation if that's
Okay, yeah, I why don't you try it, Susan? Because I think it'd be
Okay.
better rather than them seeing it really small like this.
Okay. It's not small, actually. We see it very
Oh.
fully.
Okay, well, you also see all of the things that I'm going to say.
No, we don't.
Oh, you don't? Okay,
Nope.
well, I'll just start then.
I'm not seeing her PowerPoint at all.
Okay, let me bring it up then and share the screen. So if you want to unshare, I'm just bringing it up right now.
Sure, I'll stop sharing and let Susan do it. Sorry about that.
Okay. That's
We
all
always
right.
have to have one technology glitch, right?
It always happens. Okay, let me then get that off and just give me 1 second and I will share. It's just taking some time to load. Okay, just 1 moment. It's just loading. It's taking a bit of time.
Okay.
Okay, here we go.
Hi, I'm good, and you?
Not bad. Can we load it all in front?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you so
No
much.
problem.
All right, just one more adjustment while I bring the people up here and then go into speaker highlight. Okay, go ahead.
Just a minute, Susan, I'm sorry. I'll close this.
Are you all seeing my screen?
Thank you.
Yes, we
All
can.
right, you too.
Okay, great.
All right, so I'll just tell you when to change the slide, okay? As educators, we are always looking for resources to help us develop instructional strategies for novels. And increasingly, publishers are providing online guides for the books that they publish. And that's great because the resources are not behind a paywall like teachingbooks.com. And Penguin Random House Australia, the publishers of Listen Layla, have produced a guide with a list of 14 questions for students that you will find useful. And so that's what you're seeing, that they have a book club questions here. Next slide. Okay, I think, this screenshot shows the Africa Access review of Listen Layla. And I have a nonprofit called Africa Access. And what we do is provide resources on Africa, and particularly K through 12 book reviews of K through 12 books on Africa. So what we're looking at here is the review for Listen Layla. And like most of our reviews, it's written by scholars who are knowledgeable about a particular country, in this case, Sudan. And this scholar gave the novel the highest rating, 5 out of 5. And reading a review, I have found, can also give you ideas about topics to teach about a particular country, in this case, Sudan. Okay, next slide. But Africa Access has developed a cultural organizer that can also help you identify teachable topics. And I developed the organizer really to help me with review books, but I also found it useful identifying topics to teach and research. Next slide. So this is, I've just kind of made a chart of what it looks like. Now, as I read Listen Layla, I used the organizer to record information on geography, economy, the government, etc. Listen Layla is particularly rich in cultural details. And thank you again, Yasmin, for that wonderful extensive glossary, because it provides a treasure trove of teachable topics. And some of you, if you came in early, you saw a gallery of pictures. And basically that came from my using the cultural organizer to create some images of Sudan. Next slide. Now, the Africa Access website also has a list of evaluation criteria that can help guide instructions about Africa, our sort of do's and don'ts. Next slide. So here's a big do. Do present history in chronological stages, beginning with ancient times, which is exactly what Yasmin did, showing you about, the pyramids in the past. Because as she also said, it's important to avoid a single story about conflict, war, and refugees when discussing Sudan. And this can be done by giving the historical background on Sudan before delving into contemporary problems. Next slide. Okay, some 5 facts about Sudan's history. Now, we already have talked about this, but I'll ask the question, did you know that Sudan is home to more pyramids than Egypt? And thank you, Natalie, I saw that in your chat when you put that out there. Thank you for that. Now, recently, the son of a Howard PhD student from Sudan told his 6th grade teacher about pyramids in Sudan and Sudan's ancient writing system. Well, the teacher told him that he was wrong, that he had confused Sudan with Egypt. So And she just simply just, ignored what he was saying and didn't actually learn from the student. It's important that we also learn from our students. So 5 facts. The first one we just talked about, Sudan is home to more pyramids in Egypt. And that's our look at our next fact. Next slide. Sudan was home to Nubia and Kush and 3 important early kingdoms, Kerma, Napata, and Merowe. And the images you see here are from those early kingdoms. Our next fact. 3, Nubian kings from the 25th dynasty ruled ancient Egypt for almost 100 years. And occasionally women ruled Nubia. Take note of Queen Amanirenas. She was called the queen with one eye because she lost an eye in battle. And in addition to her known war tactics, she negotiated a treaty with the most powerful male ruler at the time, who was Augustus Caesar. Next fact. 4, ancient Sudan developed a written language called Marathi as early as the 3rd century before the Common Era. Now, this language, as some of you may know, has still not been deciphered. And what archaeologists are hoping to find is a Nubian Rosetta Stone so that they can crack the script. That might be very interesting to present to your students. Who knows? They may be one of the people who would get interested in archaeology and discover the Rosetta Stone to crack Marathi. 5. We know a lot about Islam in Sudan, but did you know that Christianity reached present-day northern Sudan by the end of the 1st century after Christ? Hundreds of years, in fact, before Christianity arrived in England. Next slide. On the Africa Access website, I've started something called Lesson Starters. And it's a page that you can use to introduce aspects of Sudan's ancient history. And when you go to the page and you'll see the view there is underlined, if you click on that, then an image gallery opens and you can see these different artifacts from Sudan. Next page. Lesson Starters also provides links to videos by 3 outstanding archaeologists who study ancient Sudan. Just amazing videos, and hearing these archaeologists talk and give you important information about the kingdoms in Sudan. Next slide. And also on our Lesson Starters page, you will find an extensive curriculum on ancient Nubia. And I was so amazed because you see the QR code there. If you click on that, with your phone, it will link you directly to the artifact that you see there. And that's done throughout the curriculum. Next slide. Most K through 12 books on Sudan, as Yasmin mentioned, focus on war and refugees. But in addition to Listen Layla, we recommend these titles to give a fuller picture of Sudan. Rise of the Golden Cobra highlights the 25th dynasty Nubian pharaoh Pianki, a brilliant and compassionate leader whose astonishing campaign united ancient Egypt. Then there is a picture book, My Great-Grandmother's Gourd, which highlights a true story about tried and true Sudanese method of storing rainwater in the deep hollows of baobab trees. The Red Pencil is about war in Sudan's westernmost province of Darfur in the years following 2003, but the book also includes wonderful themes to explore about ordinary life in Darfur. In 2015, middle school students in DC wrote original poems based on the themes in the Red Pencil. There were poems about the moon, pets, love, beauty, gifts. And 600 of those middle school students came to DC's Martin Luther King Library to hear author Andrea Pinckney discuss her book. And she personally awarded prizes to 7 students for their outstanding poems. Great activity to do with students. Next slide. Now, in a couple of months before the event at MLK, Andrea Pinckney received her Children's Africana Best Book Award at the Children's Africana Festival at the Smithsonian National Museum of Art, which we have every year and which will be coming up again this year, 2023. And she gave a very dramatic reading from the Red Pencil. She donned a headscarf and it was just amazing. And next slide. Miss Pinckney was actually serenaded by one of Sudan's most outstanding musicians, Abdal Karim Al-Habli, who happily for us was living in Northern Virginia. And here's some scenes from the event. And there's Dr. Ali Dinar, University of Pennsylvania, and he's holding up Kabli's autobiography. Next to him is Dr. Cham at Howard University. At the top, my friend Achai Dang, who from South Sudan, and at the bottom, my mom, who was there to greet this wonderful, amazing musician. And so I'm going to stop here. And then I think, Susan, we're going to put people into chat rooms and talk about how ways that what they've seen, what they can use, and how they might think about using Listen Layla and introducing Sudan.
We are about 50 people here right now, so let me make 10 groups just randomly, and your mission is to discuss what you've seen and how you might use it in the classroom, and then we'll come back and be able to share at least, one insight from each of the groups. Okay, everybody, welcome back to the group. So let us just go through the groups, 1 through 10. We actually have only 9 groups. So if you'd like to share an insight from group 1, Jada, Lauren, Lisa, Tia, Yasmin, and Vivian.
Hello, my name is Jada Carter again. But in my group, we kind of just talked amongst ourselves about where we're from, kind of introduced ourselves a little bit. And Tia and I, we kind of bounced ideas about the different videos that we watched from the previous presentation, what we thought about them and how they connected to the information we kind of went over throughout the presentation. We really liked the music videos, and we never seen anything like that, and the connection to music and drawing to Sudan's culture and the different languages that they use and how they outreach to other individuals that aren't a part of their culture and aren't a part or wouldn't know much about Sudan, and kind of open that gap basically. Tia has something to add.
Yeah, I totally agree with Jada. I absolutely loved it. It opened my mind, broader a little bit, because I'm so stuck on American culture and things going on here, and I love to learn more about other cultures and listening to other music. I'm starting to get into Afro beats, so maybe this can add on to my playlist of things to listen to as well.
Okay, thank you. Tawfiq, let's see. If you're not speaking, please mute yourself. Let's go on to group 2, which is Abra, Miss or Mrs. Ebert, Esra, Mariah, and Ahlam.
We had a diverse group of people in levels that we teach. So we had university teachers, we had high school, we had 3rd grade, we had 1st grade. So we talked a lot about using the information that we got today in different ways to help our students to kind of connect with Sudanese culture and to learn a little bit more about it and to make comparisons with what they already knew. So using the book in different ways as well, perhaps using excerpts to show them different points and help them connect with a character. We also talked about potentially using the whole book at maybe the high school level as a read aloud, or using for the students to read, or using it as a read aloud in potentially 3rd grade. So we talked a lot about different ways that we might use that at different levels. The other members of my group had some really interesting insights and with some projects that they're working on. So if they want to chime in, it was a great conversation.
We'd love to hear it.
I think in 1st grade, they're doing a passport project where they learn about different countries. And our particular group member, they're focused on Australia and Africa. Their class is focused on the region. So it's perfect for this presentation. The teacher is able to get ideas for her students when they're focusing on, those countries. So that's the big project right now in 1st grade.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got disconnected somehow and I didn't know you were asking for me. I just got back.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's really, really interesting. So someone gave me the idea to compare the pyramids of Egypt with the pyramids in Sudan and kind of do a study on that, which I think the kids would find really fascinating because they already know about pyramids in Egypt, but they have no idea about Sudan. So I think they would like that a lot.
Okay, you could also incorporate mathematics because the angles of the pyramids are quite different in the two. And I think that the pyramid, just as far as I know, the sort of development of the pyramid shape and architecture had something to do with those pyramids that were built earlier in the earlier society. So lots of different possibilities. You could, build them, make them out of paper, all kinds of things like that. Okay, from room 3, we have Ellen, Gillian, Mary, Patron, and Vanessa.
I am Patty Kuntz, and I'm listed as the patron. I don't know why, but anyways, I'm not. But I did start the discussion. Having been late, I did not see the previous materials. What I did raise was the issue of curriculum development as a political issue in the state of Florida for the advanced placement students. And then the other issue that I raised was censorship by parents and how librarians deal with books from Africa that are with an Islamic focus.
Thank you very much. That's a very important point we have going on out here at this time. So does anyone else from the group want to say anything? Otherwise, I'll move on to room 5, which is Anthony, Cameron, Jacob, and Mia.
Hi. I guess for our group, something I brought up was since most students have probably heard of the pyramids in Egypt, you could bring up the pyramids in Sudan as kind of a way to connect that and kind of introduce them. You could also bring in maybe the pyramids in South America as another way to bring that in. And you could do sort of a compare and contrast like someone else mentioned. That might be a really interesting project.
Mound builders.
You could also talk about, it might be a stretch, but maybe the Mound Builder Society in Mississippi, which they're the pre-Columbian mounds in Mississippi. I don't know if anyone's heard of that, but that might be a way to kind of bring American history into that if you're, say, a teacher in American history or a similar subject.
Thank you, Anthony, and hi. Okay, anyone else from that group would like to mention anything? Okay, we have room 7, Dia, Krista, Rosina, and Tanisha.
Hi, I'm Rosina, and I think I can speak for a group. Dia mentioned how there's a strong STEM connection and how you can focus on creativity with the children. He also mentioned how in the beginning of the session, how the engineer was told that she can also be a writer, and how we always need to stress the options that you could do and be anything you want. And then I'm just finished the TAT program at Boston University, and I found some Latin inscriptions at Merowe, so I can teach and talk about Sudan and Merowe while teaching grammar, and I can do it at different levels. So
that's fantastic. Thank you. So anyone else from that group before we move on?
Yeah, I was, this is Dia Marjata. I was appalled when I heard that Yasmin was told that she could not be an engineer and a writer at the same time. And I said, who says? I mean, I don't know if this was directed at her because she was a woman. Who says you can't do more than one thing? But this also brings about the idea of what young people, girls in particular, are being told. that they can't do this or can't do that. And her focus of listening to Yela is very important in terms of STEM, that African and African American children or the diaspora, they need to get into areas of every science, every technology that they possibly can, and be able to apply that in ways that would be beneficial to their local communities or to humanity and in that respect. And I came to these ideas in teaching a history of technology at Sinclair Community College in Dayton, where students were, I allowed students, I didn't lecture them, I allowed them to create new ideas, new technology ideas. And the one thing they had to do was to present an idea or a design that would be beneficial to a community. They had to, in order to get the best grade, they had to show how this invention or whatever it was, this technology or this idea would be beneficial rather than the idea of making money from it, or how it would be benefit to the community. And I'm thinking that the children's books that that are going to be written or have been written, and those will be written in the future, I need to emphasize and what I want to say is to inspire young people to get into various areas of technology. This is going to be very important in the future. Mathematics, chemistry, physics, whatever it is, and be able to use those sciences to be able to benefit their communities. And I just used one example, which is a lot of studies are being done in South Africa by South African students on bringing up food in the oceans that are would be beneficial in helping to feed Africa to be able to feed the world. And so that's the ideas that we were, at least I was trying to induce to bring about in our discussion.
Thank you very much. We just have a few more minutes before we're going to our lunch break. So from room 8, Ashlyn, Professor Bond, Talia, Vernon, and Erica Turnipseed. By the way, I did put a link to the work of author Ari Turnipseed into the chat while she was speaking earlier today.
Wonderful. I'll just jump in very quickly and then let others, even though this was randomly assigned, I ended up in a breakout room with all of my students from Howard, except for Erica, but it was wonderful. And one of the things that we talked about was just how useful the work Listen Layla can be. We did have a question on what age level the book was presented at. What did the author think in terms of that age appropriateness? That others might have that question. And were there visuals in the book?
Middle school.
Middle school. Okay, wonderful. And also we had an author, Erica, who described some of her up and coming works. And so if there's anyone else from the group that would like to speak, we love the possible language challenge with the Meroitic language, looking for the Rosetta Stone. So I'll let some others speak from my group.
Just to continue on what Dr. Bond was saying, our group have different majors. So we are looking at how we can incorporate it into our major specific areas. So I'm a math major. So going back to the idea of pyramids and how we could introduce through this book, the idea of, oh, there are more pyramids in Sudan. And, oh, can we use Pythagoras to figure it out? And that sort of real life context. Also introducing music, because we have a music major in the class. So having the raps that we heard earlier to introduce the book. So we are really looking at how a book that you would probably see in like an English classroom can be transformed across subject matter.
Great, thank you very much. Room 9 is Gia, Mariel, and Rhonda.
I can start for my group. I think it was really interesting talking about the different perspectives. We had an educator who was business and economics focused. I do English and history. We had a teacher, an emerging teacher in our group as well. So it was very interesting to talk about our different approaches to how we would teach this book, whereas I would take a more historical aspect of it. Rhonda and her group would look at it from an economic and business perspective, which is something that I find extremely interesting. We also talked about how in today's day and age, our students tend to be really disconnected from different cultures and multiculturalism in literature, and just everyday life in general. So this would be a good branch for our students to see life outside the little bubble that we live in.
Thank you so much. The group 10, please. That was Brenda, Brianna, Candace, and Natalie. And please feel free to share your ideas.
I'll share. Our group was a mixture of educators and one parent who I want to remind her that she's the #1 educator, because you teach your children first. And many teachers came from, being moms into teaching. So we talked about, for me, discovering that Sudan had more pyramids and learning about Kush and Nubia. And I think I teach 3rd grade in Fairfax, Virginia, and we learn about ancient cultures and social studies, particularly Egypt and ancient Mali in Africa. And I was just saying how, it's wonderful to see sort of the modern trends in that society, that country, holding on to their traditions as well. And then I feel like I need more information about Sudan and learn more, not just personally, but because it literally preceded ancient Egypt. So I think that will empower me as an educator as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to make sure that we do go to break now. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your perspectives. And so we are going to now go to break, and we will be back at 12 o'clock, which will begin the second part of our presentation with a group with two books and the author of one of them, and then the editors who compiled the book in the second part, A Land with the People, and author Bahar Rahman to start off, The Sky Blue Branch, which is an elementary book, A Land with the People being a middle and high school book. So let us go to break, and we will be right back here. You can just climb right in. And please do try to be on time so that we can honor our pretty tight schedule, so that we were able to bring you so much content at one time. So enjoy your lunch or other interactions on a Saturday with your families. And we'll see you back here at noon. Welcome, Bahram. How are you?
Oh, hi, Susan. I'm good. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, we have just gone on break until 12, so
Okay.
you can just kind of hang out here. I'll be sticking around. I will have to step out for a minute, but it's going very well. We have about 50 people at our peak here, and we expect, perhaps some of a different group in the afternoon, and hopefully everyone will stick with us.
Oh, that's wonderful. I see I can share my screen, which is perfect.
Yes, do you want to try that out? Please go right ahead.
No, I just did. It works.
Yeah, you will be able to. We've done it already today, and it's just going to work out fine.
Perfect. Well, pleasure to be here with you.
Well, we're so glad you could join us. The book is just delightful.
Oh, I'm so pleased to hear that. It was not an easy book to write. I'm glad that people are getting generally the feelings that I wanted to try to convey with it. So
it's so important to emphasized as many times people working in these areas of girls' education emphasize that the reasons for girls not always in every place being able to join in, school and participate fully are very complex. They're not simple reasons.
Absolutely. Like, especially in countries like Afghanistan, there are so many reasons. Of course, there are system level reasons and forces, like what is happening right now. But at the same time, there are all these other smaller challenges and fights that I see, like kids and women and boys, and sometimes like male teachers and librarians. They just struggle every day and try to make it like small progress to make it easy for themselves.
To see that determination is just delightful.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not going to talk too much because we
keep our powder dry. Exactly. Okay.
I'll mute myself and turn off my camera, and I will be back around 12.
Okay, perfect.
Wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you. Welcome back, Bahram.
Oh, thank you, Susan. It was a very interesting conversation to hear about the censorship and what is going on in the States. In Canada, we are slightly, I would say, immune at this point, but there are forces now, there are conversations that are happening, particularly at school board level, different groups coming, arguing for creating different restrictions, from choices of bathroom to like raising the flag, for example, the pride flag during the Pride Month, or in a way, because in Canada there's a whole conversation about the role of Indigenous and First Nation history and the cultural genocide that happened there. Here, so we are kind of grappling with some of this, like a similar, but not as, I would say, as intense and acute as it's happening in the US, but
we're in an election cycle already. It seems like we just got out of one and now we're in another already. So it's certainly exacerbated by that. Oh, welcome back, everyone. We are now here in our afternoon session, and I want to begin very promptly. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming back in. I hope all of those screens represent people. And I want to invite you also to turn on your cameras. So that we, this is how these groups bond. We're doing these things virtually, but it's also lovely to be able to see each other and hear each other in person. We all know how anonymous Zoom can seem, but I've also experienced so many times how it's really also a very nice public square and where we can really bond with our ideas. So please, I invite you to turn on your screens. I will be highlighting the speaker as we begin. So let me begin with, see, I have two jobs here. Perhaps if Brenda, my co-host, could bring people into the waiting room as I read the introduction to our next speaker, because people seem to be coming in here. If you're able to, I'll pull in the ones who are in here now. So we'd like to welcome our next speaker, who is Mr. Bahram Rahman, who is the author of this delightful book, A Sky Blue Bench, and he will be telling us about it. He was born in Kabul, Afghanistan, and grew up during the Civil War and the Taliban regime. He earned a medical degree at Kabul Medical University and a master's degree in public policy at the University of Erfurt, Germany, while also working as an activist in Afghanistan in the areas of gender equality and youth political participation. Bahram came to Canada as a refugee in 2012, and today he is a senior policy advisor at the Ministry of Health in Ontario. His first picture book, Governor General's Literary Award finalist, The Library Bus, was praised by the New York Times for documenting the barriers to education experienced by girls in war-torn countries and their resilience and ingenuity in overcoming them. His fall 2021 picture book, A Sky Blue Bench, has received a starred review from Kirkus Reviews, which calls it a timely, eye-opening portrait of resilience, community, and hope. And it is also one of the winners of the last year's Middle East Outreach Council Book Award. And so I would like then to welcome Bahram Rahman to speak about his book.
Well, thank you, Susan, and thanks everyone for the invitation. It's a pleasure to spend this Saturday afternoon with all of you. As Susan read, I'm from Afghanistan. I was born in Afghanistan, and when I think about it in that description of my life, you can probably spot that like Afghanistan and Germany and Canada and probably back and forth a few times, which is the story of every refugee, I would say, internationally. So I have a few slides. They're just picture slides, nothing, no words on them, which will help me to tell about A Sky Blue Bench and why I wrote it and some of my writing processes. And then we can have a question and answers after that.
Okay, feel free to share your screen.
Okay, so I was born in Kabul, Afghanistan, although my parents come from northeastern part of Afghanistan, which is a valley called Panjshir. I have been very much lucky, I would say. I was born in a very, in a middle-class family. My parents, both of them, even my grandfather and great-grandfather, they were all educated. And they went to university. My mom was the first to go to university and in fact to school, high school in her village. So it's always a point of pride for our family. I grew up in a way, the first few years of my life in a quite I would say sheltered way. So I was born in '84. So until like 1990, I had no idea of what was going on beyond the city of Kabul, for example. So fairly a peaceful few years, and then we were thrusted into during the conflicts of the 90s, which was the Civil War. I do want to show this picture that kind of would give you a sense of like my family and where I come from and my point of view when I write my stories. So this is like a picture, 1992. The one at this little right corner is me. And this family in that time now are spread over like 8 countries. And 3 continents. And in fact, my own family, we are a family of 7 in total. We are in 5 countries, which is when you look at that from the perspective of how to then connect, share memories and tell the stories across not only generations, but also geographies, it becomes quite a challenge. And in fact, this was one of the main reasons I started to think about writing stories that are inspired by my own experiences to connect to my nephew and nieces and other relatives and friends that I have. I wanted to do a quick timeline because for A Sky Blue Bench, it's important to understand when it was the real events around the book happened. So when you look at the history of Afghanistan, the very tumultuous for especially girls' education, from 1919 until there was ups and downs. A Sky Blue Bench, the book happened during 1993, which was the civil war after the withdrawal of Soviet Union from Afghanistan. This was the first time that actually the conflict was brought into the cities. So before that, it was mostly in the rural areas and the villages. But this time, the front line was in the middle of Kabul. And if you or someone from your family and friend have been in Afghanistan, they would understand that Kabul is not a big city. It's a very small city, and the civil war conflict line was in the middle of that city. So I kind of hear some background noise.
I know I'm trying to mute the person who is.
I did this exercise backwards 10.
So for this book, A Sky Blue Bench, which tells the story of Arya, an Afghan girl who is returning back from an injury, which in the author's note that is explained, it's about an injury caused by a landmine. She's struggling to find, she realizes that no benches left in her school, and she has to find a solution for that. Because it's not easy for her. This is an event that happened in 1993 when in the middle of the civil war. What happened that a lot of Afghan living in the city of Kabul become basically refugee from one part of the city to the other part, from south and west, more to the north and east. And in this process, there were no spaces, or people couldn't really accommodate. In a way, the whole city was shrinking to a one small area. A lot of public spaces and public schools and mosques where people were living in those places. And because of the harsh winter that was happening, many of the refugee families, based on necessity, used the benches and chairs and sometimes even trees to as a firewood to stay warm. And when I went back to school that year in March of 1993, we just didn't have chairs, so we had to sit on the blue tarp, which is highlighted in the book, and that became after a while we kind of as a class we realized that this was not possible, not only for us, but one of my classmates who actually lost 2 of his legs in a landmine. It was impossible for him to sit or get up. He stood most of the time, which was 3.5 hours. Our class was 3.5 hours at that time. He basically stood against the wall because he couldn't sit down. So what we did as a class, and with the help of our teachers, so we said, you know what, why don't we just do something about it? And we started building our own benches. Some of us that I was lucky, my dad at that time had a job, we could afford it. I managed to buy bits and pieces of wood and pay a Najjar, a carpenter. But there were people who actually did the same thing that Arya did in this book and managed to find something so they can easily sit and continue with their lessons. So this is kind of the background of the story. And when I was writing about it, and when I finished my first book and I was thinking to write my second book, I was really thinking about how can I bring this story, which not only in Afghanistan, so much of problems are dominated by system level problems, but there are so many small problems that children in Afghanistan, they try to solve, teachers, they try to solve, parents, they struggle and they help each other. How can I bring something like that, kind of the small championship, the small struggles that they go through, and then highlight it and showcase their resiliency? Because that's in some ways the life that we have experienced, and that's the life so many Afghan girls and women and men and boys are going through right now, trying to make sure that they have a school, for example, they are staying connected, they have food, they take care of each other. So that highlighting that resiliency and was very, very important for me. And I'm so happy that the way the whole project kind of came together and is shared with everyone else now. I do want to highlight just show some of the pictures here. These are some of the children that when I was going back between my master's and going back to Afghanistan, that really, really stayed with me, their stories and their desire to learn, their in a way, their commitment, the self sufficiencies of some of them, and just pure bravery against all like unimaginable odds that stayed with me. And every time I write a book with the Library Buzz as Sky Blue Bench or my new project, these are the individuals that ground me. These are the individuals that make my days, to give me the courage to go on and continue, and sometimes get rid of some of those writer's block that I experience sometimes. I do want to show, there's in the author's note, there's a description of how common in a way in Afghanistan is for children to discuss about things like landmines or like bombs or rockets, and how much it is part of life. These are some of the examples of the posters or information that are used in the classrooms or used during that time. And this landmine that is notoriously horrible and it's caused so many casualties among children is called the butterfly. Sometimes I think of the ridiculousness of this name and how appealing it has been for children to when they are spread or and to get and the damage and the traumas that it has created. This landmine was used by Soviet Union over Afghanistan for many years. So there are probably still some of these that are hidden behind, I don't know, a rock or somewhere in a village, and causing problem, seriously injuring, and probably in some cases like causing life loss. But what I also wanted to touch, because like Afghanistan has been in war for so many years, and so many countries have been involved in Afghanistan, and what is left is this, there are like millions and millions and billions tons of unexploded ordnances, which for children without education and for people who clear these items, I think there's so much support is needed to make sure people like go safely, for example, to get some water, fetch some water from the river or the local village, or to go to school, as many people walk for hours to get to the closest school or hospital or a place for a public service. These are some of the other pictures that I was when I was in medical school, and during I used to go to, there's an orthopedic clinic in Afghanistan that I used to do some of my practices, and these are some of the children that the way they saw themselves. And what was very empowering for me that when you look at it, they never see themselves as disabled. They never see themselves as individuals that they have lost. They see themselves as a whole person. And I think for me, that was quite a moment, because once you experience that and how you see that those individuals continue with their lives, and there's a desire to be respected and seen as a whole, and not being honestly reduced by whatever is their injury or whatever is their background, if they have come, for example, so from a rural area which is been forced to leave their home, just being and expecting to be seen as a whole person was for me quite an experience, which I have really tried to show that in a Sky Blue Bench. I also want to mention my illustrator. I think she did a fantastic job for this book. we were really focused on making sure that the art in this book reflects the cultural diversity and nuances of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is in a crossroad of many civilizations, many cultures. So to kind of make sure that it's reflected was very important. And I think she did a fantastic job. For individuals, if you're interested to know the exact location of where this book is happening, in a way, the scenery. So the scenery of this book is in the city of Herat. So you would probably recognize it from the blue mosque and the way the women are wearing their chador around, and the back alley that was described in the book. I think it is so much important that art and story reflect the authenticity of a culture. And when this book, or like this, many others, are shared, how students from that background kind of see themselves and how much hope and voice and courage it gives to them. I am so happy to hear so many stories, especially from new Afghan evacuees that have seen the book, and they have shared their stories with their teacher. And when I get some of those notes from some of those teachers, that how much, for example, like one story was how much a girl was so excited and suddenly started to kind of talk and share with her new classmates about her life and how much this book helped. That brought me honestly to tears. This is some of the reasons that the reason I wrote the book, and I would love to have a good question and answer, and hopefully we can have a more conversation about this. Sorry if I was speaking too fast.
No, thank you very much. I was just trying to get my cursor onto my unmute button. Okay, welcome. Please use the raise hand function and we will be happy to recognize you with a question. I see Professor Bond.
Yes, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I'll lower my hand. I just I have quite a few free service students here, so hopefully they'll have questions shortly as well. But how did what happened to Malala Yousafzai in 2012 when she was shot by the Taliban for going to school? What impact did that have on, or how did that inform your thinking and your writing?
Well, it's like the story of Malala was a symbol of story of many girls and women in Afghanistan. I think prior to Malala, women were shot for speaking up and working in a news station, for example. Teachers were forced. So in a way, I think what the story of Malala did was bringing more visibility, I would say, to the people living outside areas controlled by the Taliban. Although, like, for me, I drive my stories more from my own experiences, from the kids that I have met. To be honest, it's very similar to Malala. And I think that's when I see Malala and the work she did and how brutally she was targeted. Like, it's just the reflective of so many other Afghan girls and women that are living in the tribal areas of Pakistan, or even in Iran now, I would say. Like, there's this culture that has been the practice of targeting women for some of their fundamental and basic rights is something that it's just not only in Afghanistan. It is something that has been happening in the region, and I think Malala brought that visibility to the outside world, and was a source of information for many Afghans, that for Afghan girls to continue to see themselves, because they see themselves in Malala and what she's doing and how she's like overcoming adversities, and I'm very proud of her.
Thank you. I see a question from Anthony and Carla.
Hi, yes. I just want to say first, thank you for that wonderful presentation. It was very detailed. I just have a quick question. Do you have, I guess, maybe like an author website that lists some of your other works or something like that, or a resource?
Unfortunately, I don't have an author's website. I have an Instagram page. I think that's the only source I have. But my publisher has a page that has some information about my books and my projects. Yeah.
I have just put a link to resources for the books that have been presented here today. It's a small list, but it will help you to get to those resources.
So the my publishing house, Pajama Press, they have developed fantastic teaching materials for Sky Blue Bench and also the library bus. There are a few other programs that the book was nominated. They have developed their own as well. So there should be many sources and materials available, not only how to engage, for example, having a discussion about some of the topics and the themes discussed in this book with, let's say, kindergarten, but also to the higher grades, grade 2, 3, 4, because some of the, when I write books, I don't think I'm writing for children. I just want to tell a story. and the format and the style, it comes later on. Like, so I'm like many students in Ontario, this is part of a reading program right now, which I hear like even students in grade 5, they're reading the book because it's a good way. Children, like picture books are a good way to have a conversation about some of the hard, very difficult themes that you wouldn't be able to have otherwise. So.
Thank you very much, and thanks for bringing that up. I've just pasted the link into it, and please, I would love to see some additional questions coming out of our really nicely diverse audience of about 50 people here. Any comments? Questions, particularly from Professor Bond's students. Mariel Herzog.
Hello, thank you so much for your talk. I really, really appreciate it. I teach middle school and high school students, and right now, currently, and what I do every year or so with my juniors and seniors is we read 1,000 Splendid Suns, which is a very powerful book. And I know that our discussion focuses on a lot of the trauma and the negative aspects of women in Afghanistan in that book, but I would love to use your book as a primer to bring out the culture, and the illustrations are extremely visual for my students. I like to do that a lot with my older students, bring in children's books to really highlight the culture. Do you have any teaching strategies that I could use with your book to prepare my students for the very intense read that comes with 1,000 Splendid Suns?
Absolutely, I will happy to. There are some documents that I have. I can share it with Susan, and then maybe she can forward it to you. I totally agree. I love the writings of Mr. Hosseini. But what I want to also say that my intention in my writing is to push some of the harsher themes, I would say, which is war, conflict, displacement, traumas, personal traumas, more to the background and more focus on the real life that goes on. like when I think about my school days in Kabul and later on in other parts of Afghanistan, as children, we just continued with our life. When you hit the ground, when you hear something, or you are, for example, had friends that they had their house was hit by let's say a rocket or something. After a week, they showed up back to school because you have no other option than to live. And life and hope are the things that you clench on. So that is why I really try to focus and bring that to the front. So it's the same with the library bus. Like there's like Paris, the mother is going through it and she's trying to help. And the same with a Sky Blue Bench. Because for Arya, the option of giving up, there's no that she doesn't have that option. She has to move on. That is part of her reality, and she has to find a solution for it. And I think I find it powerful because in a way, I see it as a more reflective of my own experiences. Someone who grew up during the war and in the middle of civil war, we had to go to school and we could hear, for example, the sky of Kabul being hit by thousands of rockets, but we still went to school. And I sometimes think about my parents, how difficult that would have been for them. But again, there's no other option. You just cannot stay at home forever. Yeah, you still have to go on with your life and you have to build something for yourself.
Thank you so much. That's so powerful. Thank you.
Thank you. There's some nice comments in the chat from Rosalind Pichetsky. Bahram's presentation and book are wonderfully inspiring and hopeful, despite the horrors. This conversation is showing how books transcend age. Beautiful, true books about resistance and resilience that speak to all age groups. Another Altheria says, I appreciate learning about your intent to not put the focus on the war and violence, but to show the everyday lives of children as an expression of universality.
I think you captured it very well. Yeah.
Any other comments and questions? We still have a few minutes for that. I would definitely like to go into breakout rooms briefly, as we did with the other book. It's one of the most valuable parts of this long-term relationship with Howard University's African Studies Center and Georgetown University Center for Contemporary Arab Studies and Muslim Christian Understanding, is that we allow teachers to give us the perspectives and give our authors perspectives of their needs and their ideas. Professor Bond?
If we might just see a cover of the beautiful book, I noticed from that I love the cover. So beautiful. Thank you.
I have also put into the teacher resource guide that I just linked in the chat. I put a YouTube video there and also the Pajama Press teaching guide that the author just mentioned. There's also several read alouds that are out there. I believe Sankofa has a read aloud, which is one of the most wonderful sites ever anyway.
Before, I want to mention that it's like this book and the other one, my first book, The Library Bus. I think what is quite, I during the working, especially with the art, I found it was there's a lot of misconceptions about Afghan culture, and in a way it kind of blends in with Middle East is quite diverse, and also the like Iran and Central Asia, but then there are nuances that needs to be captured. And I have worked so much with my publisher and illustrator that we're trying to capture those nuances. For example, when you will see the mother is wearing the hijab very differently, or you would see some of the clothing, the size of even turban, for example, is different between different parts of Afghanistan. So you kind of, I think that was very like a fun part of this project to to kind of bring that kind of like a nuanced representation of Afghanistan to art and to people and everyone who can enjoy it. So I'm really, really thankful for the opportunity, and yeah, I can't wait to come back hopefully next year. So
This is my favorite illustration, which is when the Najjar, the carpenter, donates a bucket of paint, and how they put use to it, and so the whole theme of the blue is just so vibrant in this book.
It's like I have a very close relationship and like love for the color of blue, and for Afghan children that has always been like, when you grew up, the color of peace is blue. Like these are the things that you grew up and to learn, and you sing in the school, for example, you draw the image of like a bird, a dove, and the blue. But also what is fascinating is that the lapis lazuli, which has the color, the deep color of blue, which is so tied with Afghan culture and how people connect to that. So you do have blue in so many levels that has special meaning, and that you connect to. And here I'm so glad that page and the wisdom of Khaka Najjar is translated in beautiful way with the art. I do want to mention that my next book that is coming, that has blue in it as well. So so we will be talking about the color of blue, hopefully, I think in the future too.
Well, in teaching about place, Afghanistan is one of the sources, or one of the few sources in the world, of lapis lazuli, the famous gemstone, and I believe also turquoise. So that's another thing. And I should mention that the color blue was mentioned by Yasmin Abul Majid about her book as a color of the people asking for change.
Yeah.
Any more questions before we go into breakout groups briefly? Just scrolling through here, just raise hands. Okay, then we have, I'm going to then go ahead and make again 10 breakout rooms. So please feel free to join, and our authors, of course, are also welcome to join. We already have our two editors of the next presentation book, so I'm going to just go ahead and I guess I'll just recreate the rooms. That's what it's wanting me to do. So I will make 10 of those, and here we go. Okay, I'm going to close the breakout rooms now and have us share out, and for the last minutes until we begin our next presentation.
I just want to say it was a pleasure to join all of you. I think I have to sign out now, and the breakout sessions were fantastic. Thank you, Nati, for the questions. It was amazing. So
thank you so much, Bahram Rahman, and we hope that well, of course, all of you get to choose a book that will be shipped to you. So you will have an opportunity at the end of the session to fill out an evaluation form and affirm the choice, your choice of book. Thank you so much, and we wish you all the best. Okay, if we have a few minutes to share out, I'm just going to go through the groups one by one. And the first one is Ashlyn Lee and Mariah Tomei, and I believe Brenda Randolph was in that group as well briefly.
So in our group, we basically, since I'm a pre-service teacher, I was taking more on our other member in the group, and she was saying, as she's a third grade teacher, it'll be really good to introduce it for her students because she has a student who's from Iraq. So, making those connections and introducing these themes in such a way that the students will see the beauty and not just what you might see on the news, which is all the war and stuff. So it was a very good conversation of how it could be practically used in a classroom from a teacher for me.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mariah, did you want to say something or?
We just had really good conversations of just how we could, translate it into the classroom. Because I teach third grade, so I think the book would be perfect to just have a discussion with them and really just see the beauty of the country. And that's pretty much it that we kind of talked about.
Okay, thank you very much. Natalie, room 2 is Natalie, Reginelle, and Talia.
Yes. In our group session, we didn't talk so much about specifics of the book, but I was asking him questions about the culture, Islamic culture, and the influence about the treatment of women, the not being educated and so forth. And so I was asking whether or not people in those regions have ever considered sharing another perspective. Even though in modern society we value formal education, because you don't go to school doesn't mean you're not educated or you're ignorant. You still have skills, you still have an intellect about you. And I was just saying how it would be good to hear a balance of that, because you have women who run marketplaces and the commerce of a lot of these countries who haven't been formally educated, and he was, sharing some things in terms of, his research and so forth. There were other people in the group. I have to apologize. I may have seemed like I was overtaking the conversation, but I really just want to say, like, these Islamic culture has been around for thousands and thousands of years. Some of this stuff that's so current, but we don't incorporate a balanced viewpoint, I don't think. And so he was just sharing some things in terms of his research about that.
Okay, great. Anyone else in the group before I move on? Okay, we have then room 4, which is Cameron, Gabriella, Leah, and Lisa, and also Tia.
We kind of discussed also a little bit on what the previous groups were talking about, when and how we would mention these books throughout the classroom. We thought the book was pretty significant and can expand as far as globalization, mentioning globalization throughout classrooms. We think that would be pretty important as far as when involving globalization throughout the classes and schools and stuff.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tia. Anyone else? Leah, Lisa, Gabriella, Cameron? Edith, Michelle?
Actually, I was, the globalization idea just came to me. We were talking about, in our group, I'm group number 5, we have a music teacher, or a music student who wants to be a music teacher for middle schoolers. And so I challenged him to think about what kind of musical score would he sort of develop for the story, or does it even prompt you to learn, to understand and listen to Afghani music and how that would accompany the storytelling. And that would be a way of him, although not from the Afghani culture, sharing his gift of love of music and using music as a tool for sharing the story.
Thank you very much for that idea. I was just thinking also to expose the students to the kind of music that would be in the ears of the students in the school of the Sky Blue Bench and the ambiance of the surrounding area. So that's important too. Berna, did you want to say something about that, your ideas?
Yeah, I think that was one of the great things we talked about in the group, and that kind of led me to think about how I think how lucky I guess I am to be in the position because when I start teaching, all the kids I'm teaching will have a lot of them will be able to access kind of the internet, stuff like that. So I think a good example of what I'm trying to say is when we all heard the fact about the pyramid and how there are more pyramids in Sudan and how we all thought like, oh, I've got to research that more. I think just introducing a book like this and some of the musical instruments will kind of just will kind of influence the kids to just go and search on their own. And that's just a whole thing they can use to broaden their sense of culture. And I think even if I can't figure out how to incorporate this into a lesson musical wise, I think just actually going over this is just important, like the color blue is so significant in culture. I could try and get my students to kind of make a melody or just sounds that would replicate that feeling inside them. So I feel like there's a lot of things you can do. And I think that's why music is so cool for stuff like this, because all the cultures use it. So I think it'd be a great avenue to kind of introduce different cultures into schools.
Well, speaking of pyramids and multiple varieties of them, Central Asia is the home to the ancestor of the violin, and many people may not know that.
So could I was in group 5 too, so could I add just one
Sure.
thing? Okay, so yeah, I kind of encouraged because I'm very interested in cross-curricular interdisciplinary working in a high school, and since I deal with many topics for all the teachers, Edith and I were encouraging Vernon to talk a lot about his future, and I brought up the color blue as possibly significant. Ramlan actually said, it's a color that all the children know and understand. So ways that we can incorporate different aspects of the color blue in their lives into that music or other subjects as well, and that way students might become very engaged or interested in searching for other topics about that.
Beautiful idea. Thank you. Does anyone else in room 5 want to say something, or shall I move on to 6? Going once, twice, 3 times. So, okay, room 6 is Autumn, Erica, Mary, Perilli, and Rosina.
Well, hi everyone. Erica just is so awesome. I looked up your books while we were on the side. We talked about several things. We first talked about the state of Afghanistan now, the progression and regression in the education of girls. We talked about writing in general and teaching. It was just enlightening and good to talk to each other.
That's always a real highlight. Okay, is there anyone else? Just quickly, I don't like to shut anyone down if they're taking time to unmute or anything like that. Okay, room 7 is Altheria, Brianna, Helen, Professor Helen Bond, Jada, and Mariel Herzog.
We talked about a lot of different things in our group, but one of the things that really stuck out to me was one of the professors talked about the idea of empathy and using the book to talk about empathy with our students, which I know I struggle a little, well, my students struggle with the concept of empathy. I see this commonly every single year, and going about teaching socio-emotional learning within literature and tying it into the vibrant illustrations that we see in the book. And I thought that was a very cool thing to think about, and wrote myself a little note because I don't think about that as much, but it's super important for our students to understand as well.
Great, thank you, Mario. And, having just gone through instruction by COVID, on Zoom and all of that, there's still a lot of residual difficulties that some students have. And so that was also a question of seeing what obstacles face, students here. So it's a good way to connect there. Edith.
Yeah, we also had a great conversation about the fact that children's books are great ways of, expanding adult minds as well. I mean, when you look at a cartoon, even though they're rated G or PG, they often have a theme that is so relevant for adults to sort of take in as well. And so that we shouldn't limit the use of these books just for elementary or middle schoolers, that, the young lady was talking about using them with high schoolers, at that point they have a different lens or an expanded lens, and so much more can be sort of pulled out of the story from those, at that level, from those eyes.
Absolutely. And sometimes using very simple material unlocks their minds because it's not intimidating, like some of the reading material we give students in high school. And so I had the
Yes.
experience with a story I had read to my granddaughter describing an ethical conflict using, Biggie the elephant. It's like amazing how they were, right up there and were willing to then engage with it. Okay, we just have a minute or two left before we move on to the next one. So let's move on to room 8, Abra, Ayana, Dia, Jacob, and Tamira.
So we ended up talking about global literature in general in our classrooms and how that might be implemented. And one of the things that we were talking a lot about was looking at these stories, just as in this book, not looking at the problems faced or at wars and at struggles, but really looking for those stories of empowerment and joy and resistance, and telling the stories from those points of view. So really putting the power back into those cultures and focusing on that side of the story rather than on the victim side of the story, because I think a lot of times we have a tendency to talk about wars and suffering as opposed to telling those stories of empowerment. So I think the book that we were just listening to the narrative about really lends itself to that, because we're looking at the really human side and how they're solving problems and how they're living just a regular life, and not about as much the problems that they're facing.
Great, thank you. Room 9, I believe, was the last one that was an active discussion, but we'll check in. Nicole, Patty, Vanessa, and Vivian. Okay, and the last group was Mario, Rhonda, and Rosalind. I know that she left the group to prepare because she's one of our speakers in the next group. So is there anyone else who wants to offer a parting comment before we move on?
I left accidentally and couldn't go back, but I just wanted to say that I appreciated the colorful illustrations, because every time I think of Afghanistan, I just think beige, sand, and blue, women wearing blue. So this was really nice and eye-opening.
Definitely. The sand, I might call that the sand problem with the region. Okay, all right. Thank you so much. And it's my pleasure now to introduce our next speakers and book. The book is also an award winner in the Middle East Outreach Council Book Awards, and it is, of course, A Land with a People. It is we have the privilege of having 2 of the editors who will tell the story of how this book came together. So let me just quickly read those their bios. Rosalind Pachetsky is a distinguished professor emerita of political science at Hunter College and the Graduate Center, City University of New York. She's a widely published feminist scholar and recipient of a MacArthur Genius Fellowship. Her first book, Abortion and Women's Choice, The State, Sexuality, and Reproductive Freedom, was cited by the United States Supreme Court in its landmark decision, Planned Parenthood of Southeastern Pennsylvania versus Casey, 1992, and received an award from the American Historical Association. Her many subsequent articles and books on reproductive, sexual, and gender rights and justice have been translated and distributed in countries across the globe. Since 2013, Professor Pichetsky has been an active member of Jewish Voice for Peace and part of the New York City chapter's leadership team, as well as traveling to Palestine on delegations with Eyewitness Palestine in 2017 and 2019. Along with Esther Farmer and Sarah Sills, she co-edited, authored A Land with a People, Palestinians and Jews Confront Zionism. And Professor Pichetsky lives in New York City with her 2 cats and is the proud grandmother of Anna and Jack Macias Pichetsky. Sarah Sills is a lifelong artist activist, graphic designer, organizer, and event producer. Over the years, she co-led a Teamsters trade union delegation to China, organized clerical workers at Columbia University, raised money for women's cooperatives in El Salvador during the Civil War in the early 1990s, and worked at a pro-Aristide Haitian newspaper. After a trip to Palestine in 2012, she became an active supporter of the Palestinian House of Friendship and a Jewish Voice for Peace New York City chapter leader, dedicating herself to fighting for Palestinian rights. In addition to co-editing and designing A Land with a People, she's been involved with producing storytelling workshops and the Wrestling with Zionism Readers Theater. So welcome, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Susan. And it's wonderful to see everyone here today. Also want to thank the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies and the Center for Muslim Christian Understanding for inviting us. We are really honored and thrilled to have received this award and excited about how it opens the possibility of readership among possibly older middle school students and definitely high school and college students. So here is our book, A Land with the People. And it is a book of personal stories, history, poetry, and art that elevates the rarely heard voices on the issue of Palestine-Israel. Our book blends narratives of secular, Muslim, Christian, and queer Palestinians who endure the particular brand of settler colonialism that is known as Zionism, with the transformational journeys of Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, queer, and Palestinian Jews who have come to reject the Zionist narrative. So A Land with the People emerges from the process of facing what has happened in historic Palestine and to Palestinians and Jews as a result. So, as mentioned in my bio, I went to Palestine in 2012. I've been active in a lot of other areas. I'm a secular Jew who grew up in a very progressive Jewish home, very concerned about the issue of justice for all peoples. And this trip to Palestine completely changed my life. I felt that as a Jew, my voice really mattered to speak out about what the oppression and horrors of what's going on in that part of the world. And so I became very active with Jewish Voice for Peace. And we, as a chapter in New York, ended up collecting stories from our members that became a first self-published book that we called Confronting Zionism. And that evolved into a reader's theater that we called Wrestling with Zionism, which eventually included half Palestinian stories and half Jewish stories. And it had a huge impact on the audiences and really allowed people who were often really afraid to talk about the subject to be able to discuss openly their positions and feelings. And because these are stories, they're not polemics, it really was a safe place to encourage other people to tell their stories. So we collected more stories, and as a result of those, we decided it was time for a second book, which became A Land with the People. And in addition to the stories, we thought it was very important to include a history, which Roz wrote so powerfully and sets the context for the stories. And in addition, we have some beautiful poetry, as I mentioned, and 2 timelines, one of which is very unique because it's a timeline of anti-Zionism, which has gone on for, over 100, over 100 years. So there've been, it's part of our Jewish tradition that some of us are very proud of. So that's a bit about my relationship to the book. And Roz, do you want to share?
Sure. First of all, you know, our wonderful co-editor, Esther Farmer, wasn't able to be here, but I do want to throw in here that Esther Farmer comes from a Palestinian Jewish family. And many people don't realize that there's such a thing as Palestinian Jews. Her family was from Hebron in Palestine. And she would tell you that story if she were here. All the stories in the book are very personal, very distinct, unique. They're wonderful. They're told with such vividness. And they are stories also of resilience. My story is in the book too, but it's a little different. I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which it felt weird even as a child. I thought, what am I doing in Tulsa, Oklahoma? We were definitely a minority. It was very much all my friends were Christians. And my family were very strongly believing Jews, observant Jews, but with the Reform tradition. So they were very liberal, but very practicing Jews. And I went to what we called Israel when I was 16 years old. And that really changed my life. My story's in the book, you can read it. It was how I became radicalized and in some ways a junior feminist because of the ways that my experience was denied in my hometown by the rabbis. It was an experience of witnessing racism. And I was a kid, I mean, it was during the early civil rights movement and I became involved in the civil rights movement. And when I saw racism in Israel, I was really astonished and hurt and angry. And so it really started off a lifetime of radical activism as an anti-racist, as a feminist, as a person against war and oppression. I landed in Jewish Voice for Peace many years later, after a lifetime of being a professor and feminist activism and writing, etc. And I felt Jewish Voice for Peace finally brought me home. It's a marvelous organization. It feels like a blend of politics that is about social justice, is about anti-racism, and is, of course, about the liberation of Palestine. So doing this book was like just one of the greatest experiences of my life with two wonderful, wonderful women, Sarah and Esther, and lots of collaborators, lots of contributors whom we befriended, we became close with, including the Palestinians and the Jews of many, many backgrounds. And let me turn it over to Sarah. We have, 20,000 members in Jewish Voice for Peace. We may be the largest Jewish anti-Zionist organization, maybe in the world. And we become more visible, speaking out about the recent atrocities, which I'll talk about in a minute. But let me let Sarah tell you more about why we chose to do this book.
Thanks, Roz. So we just felt that it was very important to move away from the conventional terms that frame the situation there as a conflict, and a conflict between two equal sides, both sidesism. That's what you hear so often. You know, we don't consider it even a conflict, in fact. So because of the imbalance of power. We also wanted to elevate the voices I mentioned earlier that have not been heard, and we wanted to situate Zionism in its history in relation to settler colonialism and racism and ethno-nationalism, as Roz just mentioned. And also, as I mentioned again, we just feel very proud of the long history of Jewish anti-Zionism, which a lot of people are not aware of. So also, and very importantly, to spark this kind of conversation that we're having today with all of you, educators and librarians and administrators. So this is very exciting for us to have this conversation with you. And it's also very important for us to mention that Palestinians have been working for decades on trying to teach the history, the true history of Palestine. And it's an uphill battle. So this, before I turn over to Roz again, I just want to quote a wonderful writer and educator. Her name is Nora Lester Murad. And she says, as racist right-wing forces try to shut down the teaching of African-American studies, invisibilize indigenous nations, and dehumanize queer people, education advocates are pushing back by demanding the honest teaching of hard, quote unquote, hard topics. All social justice efforts must also include Palestinians. Like other people of color, Palestinians and their allies face intensified censorship from special interest groups. They also face censorship from well-meaning people who have fallen prey to the nonsensical suggestion that Palestinian equality harms Jews. The only antidote to this dangerous idea is for us to bravely teach the truth about Palestine. So, over to you, Roz.
Okay, well, first, we want to acknowledge how hard it is right now to be a teacher, especially in public schools. The challenges you guys are up against, I mean, I don't think I could have done it. I so admire you. Being forced into ideological straitjackets. Of course, this is worse in some states than others. I mean, maybe Florida, my kids are in Texas. It's really a hard time. I remember back in the 50s, a time of great censorship of books, especially over sexuality. Well, now it's over teaching even our real history in the United States, the history of enslavement of African descended peoples. And this is just, it's just unacceptable. But on the bright side, I mean, I just share with you that I had the privilege and the pleasure very recently of going with my granddaughter in the Dallas, Texas area to something called the North Texas Teen Book Fair. And it was amazing. It was like 1,000 kids from middle schools and high schools who were absolutely passionate about reading, who were dying to have books, who were lining up for free books and to get authors to sign their books. And then panels, they were mainly, the ones I went to, young teachers of color who were writing books, and I'm sorry, young authors of color, who were writing books about the experience of kids of color, how they try to fight back, how they try to organize for the environment, for against housing discrimination in their cities. These are all books that are for middle schoolers and high school kids, and they were just brilliant. And it was eye-opening for me to see that kids want to read. They're not just on their screens, they're reading. So that said, the current situation, I mean, you guys are teachers. Definitions are important. We've been talking about Zionism. What is Zionism? Zionism is the belief that Jewish life and Jewish ideology centers around the idea of a Jewish state, a state for a homeland for Jews, but mainly for Jews, and other people are secondary. And if that sounds abstract, let me just illustrate it with a few historical realities. When we talk about Jewish supremacy, we're talking about the whole history of Jewish entry into the region and into what was historic Palestine, starting with what was called the Balfour Declaration. The British initiated this Balfour Declaration from Lord Balfour in 1917, which basically denied the Arab presence in the region. It declared that it was important to prioritize Jewish immigration and establish a national home for the Jewish people. And that's why the title of our book, A Land with the People, is rejecting the notion that it was a land without a people for a people without a land. It was a myth. And way before the state of Israel was founded in 1948, I mean, there were many indications of this notion that the land should be taken over by mainly European Jews. When we say Ashkenazi, that means they're descended, as my family was, from white European Jews. When we say Mizrahim, that means they came from the east. They came from Iraq, from Morocco, Tunisia, from other parts of the actual region that's known as Arab. So even in the 1930s and 40s, people like David Ben-Gurion, who became the first president of Israel, were talking about demographic balance. And in 1947, Ben-Gurion stated he wanted demographic balance, and that meant only a state with at least 80% Jews is a viable and stable state. We should be in the majority. We should have sovereignty and supremacy. And this was iterated over and over again by various laws and also actions, violence. And always in settler colonialism, law and force go hand in hand. It was true in this country against the indigenous peoples of this country. So for example, in 1950, the Israeli Knesset passed something called the Right of Return Law. And it basically gave an automatic Jewish nationality and Israeli citizenship to all Jews anywhere in the world. Like I could go there and I would automatically be a citizen, but not for Palestinians who had lived there for generations and generations and generations. There were many, many laws like that. In 2018, the Knesset passed something called the Jewish Nation State Law. And what that did was to declare that in the state of Israel, the nation state of the Jewish people and the right of national self-determination belonged uniquely to the Jewish people within its borders, therefore disenfranchising basically all the Palestinians. Now, there are Palestinians in Israel who have citizenship, but it's very much a second-class citizenship, very similar to what happened in South Africa, to what happened in this country. The violent side of Jewish supremacy has taken the form over many, many years of illegal settlements. Countries all over the world recognize that the settlers are, when they come into Palestinian areas in the West Bank or in East Jerusalem or Gaza, and build these settlements, that's illegal. And then the settlers, I mean, when I was there with Eyewitness Palestine in 2017 and 2019, I heard so many personal stories of, well, they came and they burned our crops. They ran, they cut off our water here. They set up separate roads. If you go to Hebron, you see there's a little path that Palestinians can go on, and then next to the road, which is the main road where Jewish Israeli cars can go. There's just thousands of examples of what is legitimately called apartheid in the state of Israel, and all of the region, all of Palestine, apartheid. And if you complain about that, well, let me just say most recently, horrible events have occurred because the Israeli elections in the fall produced the most right-wing government we've ever actually seen in that country, a government of people who are self-avowed fascists. They say this town should be wiped out. They say there should never be a right of return for Palestinians. They approve of settlers going into a village called Harawa and basically burning it, just burning houses, burning local stores, just burning it down. Even Israeli military have called that a pogrom. And pogroms, I learned as a child, that's what happened to my grandparents' communities in Russia. Pogroms were Cossack soldiers coming in and killing people and burning them down. And that's what's been happening to Palestinians. But if you try to criticize that, very often we have what we have called the weaponization of anti-Semitism, that is, accusations of anti-Semitism. And many teachers, many of my friends who are Palestinians or support Palestine or trying to teach about Palestine in colleges and maybe in high schools are accused of anti-Semitism. Some have lost their jobs. They've been fired. They cannot get jobs. They've been blacklisted, basically. And many states and jurisdictions and universities are adopting something called the IRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Association definition of anti-Semitism, which basically, I mean, it defines anti-Semitism in very uncontroversial ways, but it also includes the idea that if you criticize Israel and its policies, that is anti-Semitic. And this is very dangerous. So it's just something we would ask you to be on the lookout for and criticize. That's the negative part. But we want to know more about what you're doing in your schools. And we know that you're fabulous teachers and that you're open to alternative versions of history and geography and politics. And so we want to hear how you do that, because honestly, I don't think I could do what you do. Sarah.
So first of all, I'm seeing in the chat a question about the definition of IRA. So we can find that for you after this talk. Also, or you could Google it probably pretty easily, but happy to find it for you. I've also put into the chat a link. It looks really long. I hope it works, but it's a link for educators to sign if you want to oppose this IRA Act. So I hope some of you will consider doing that.
And the definition is there in that letter, the full, it's a long thing. You can see it there.
Oh, right. True. So yes, we do have questions for you all because we're very interested in how you might approach this issue in your classrooms, what your resources are, if you've had, controversial situations, which I imagine some of you have, if you're looking for resources. So we would like to open this up for a little bit to hear from all of you.
And Lisa.
Hi, I'll just say a quick thank you. First of all, thank you so much for being a part of this conference. I want to address what you were mentioning, Rosalind, near the end there about some faculty like losing their jobs or being afraid to speak up. I'm kind of a follower of Mark Lamont Hill, and he almost lost his job at Temple
Amen.
University.
Oh yeah.
Yes. I would be very interested in having the two of you come, or at least one, I have to see what our funding could be. But yes, I used to be on the Holocaust and Genocide Committee at our school. And I have brought, I've brought some Palestinian issues. I'm a faculty member, professor of English at Raritan Valley Community College. And I've brought a Sama Sabawi, a Palestinian Australian, to the campus. I've also tried to make sure that I included Palestinian text in my teaching. And I just wanted to say, after what happened to Mark Lamont Hill and other professors that I've seen articles about other professors who have lost their jobs. I'm very cautious, and I'm trying to figure out how to have a conversation with the committee chair of the Holocaust Committee, because it's not just that I want this issue to be something that can be talked about on the campus, but it's that I'd really like the Holocaust Committee to co-sponsor some of the programming centering around Palestinians, Middle Eastern issues, Muslim, just out at the statement, the mission statement that we have is that we embrace diversity religiously, culturally, and so forth. And the individuals behind it, I don't see them fully meeting that mission. And so whenever I try to have a conversation about being more open, I basically just get like shut down, and I'm told that I just don't have enough of an understanding of it. And when I visited both Israel and Palestine, Jordan, Dubai, a number of places. And when I mentioned to a coworker that someone who's on the committee, that I was visiting Palestine, first of all, the individual didn't feel that that individual didn't recognize Palestine as a home place. Additionally, the person said to me, "You're going to the land of Hamas." And those are, it's just, so I'm trying to figure out how to have a conversation without losing my job.
Lisa, we're so grateful for you are fabulous.
Thanks.
Thank you for being there.
And we would be happy to talk further with you, Lisa, about speaking at your college.
Where is your college?
In New Jersey.
Oh, okay, great.
Somerset County.
Oh,
Somerset
fabulous.
County, New Jersey, right here near New York.
Okay, send us your email. We'll set something up.
Thank you. Thank you.
So does anyone else have anything they want to share about teaching this issue, whether you're a high school teacher, college? We're very interested.
I just want to step in quickly to mention that that the topic is, have been studying state academic standards, including the national standards and various organizations like the National Council for Social Studies and so on. And then following upon that, the state standards that have been adopted across the country over the past, literally, I think it's now 30 years. And so when teachers teach about this, it isn't just a matter of them bringing something up out of whole cloth. The topic is in geography standards, not everywhere, not always the same, but it is in particularly grade 6, 7, and other geography standalone courses. It is also part of world history if it's taught in 2 parts of ancient civilizations, or up to 1500, say, and then beyond in a second course in modern world history. You will find the topic in both of those courses having to do with the, with the ancient history of the region and its changing history over time, as well as in the modern period with regard to the post-World War I period. And so it's not something that teachers are just sort of, okay, we'll decide to teach, we won't. Of course, what happens is that many teachers omit teaching it because they're uncertain what to do. And so there are, however, standards-based ways to do it. And it is, of course, a legitimate topic. Also, it has come up in some of the, topics that might be covered in civics and government courses, comparative government courses, and indeed in U.S. history as a foreign policy issue. which of course it is more than a foreign policy issue. It is a question of people and history. So I just wanted to throw that out as a context that it is within the mandated subjects that are out there. It may or may not be tested in anything. It's also, of course, in the AP courses as well, meaning advanced placement, world history, and so on, and AP world geography, which is I forget the acronym for that, but in any case, AP human geography. So just to set that context for the authors and editors, and also for everyone here.
That's really helpful. And that's actually, we were going to ask about what areas it came up in the curriculum. So I was also thinking, I mean, in relation to what Lisa had said about Holocaust, it's a really tremendous misconception that, Israel and Zionism were just responses to the Holocaust. As the examples I gave you show, they began many, many years before the Holocaust. There had been no Holocaust. So that whole area from post World War I history, from the Balfour Declaration through all the years of Jewish outmigration from Europe, where many Jews, like my grandparents, went to the United States, they went to Australia, they went to Latin America. I mean, it was not only about Israel, but Israel was the focus of Zionism. And it was not just about the Holocaust. I mean, it was about escaping trauma from anti-Semitism in many places. But in some places, like in Iraq and Morocco, and and Palestine itself, there were Jews who lived there for generations and generations. And for a combination of circumstances, they were kind of driven out of their homes, and they wanted to be in their homes. They liked, they were part of Moroccan culture or Iraqi culture. And so all these displacements that come from, anti-Semitism and the sort of greed for territory that happens with colonial regimes, that all, I think, should be part of the curriculum. People need to know. And then how people fought back, because they always fought back. There was something called the Israeli Black Panthers, and they mostly came from Morocco. They were what we call, Mizrahi Jews. When they came to Israel, not voluntarily, but because it was the only place they could go to, they established something called the Israeli Black Panthers. They were not modeling themselves after the Black Panthers we know here. That's what they call themselves, as a symbol of, fierce resistance. So there's lots to learn, and it's interesting for kids, I think, to learn.
Indeed. And I would just like to add, before we go into our breakout rooms, some resources. I want to share some resources. First of all, in our book, in the back of our book, we have a list of books and articles, websites, newsletters, that kind of thing. We also, I mentioned earlier that we created a theater, I think I mentioned this, a readers theater called Wrestling with Zionism that was made up of half Palestinian and half Jewish stories.
Growing up in Israel in the 1990s,
sorry about that.
there was...
that was that. I am going to it's a very short promo video, 3 or 4 minutes, but it will give you a feeling for how we're sharing these stories. And you're welcome to take a look. And also another resource is something Nora, whose quote I read earlier, had shared, which are children's books about Palestine, which some of you might feel are useful. I also just wanted to share as well there are some podcasts that you might find instructive. this is just a sampling. I mean, there are so many films that are really useful, but if you want to investigate any of these, I'm just putting them in the chat for now. So Susan, I'm not sure if it's time or to put us into the breakout groups, or Roz, if there was anything else you wanted to add before we do that.
No, but I want to thank Susan for these marvelous resources for us. And we will share them with our colleagues who are trying to disseminate, methods and curricula for teaching Palestine, these resources from the Middle East Pedagogy Initiative. This is a secondary education module. Thank you so much. I'm just trying to write them down.
I'm putting all of this in the resource document that I have shared a couple of times and will share before the end. There are also some resources on each of the books that we've featured today. We are actually right on the button for going into breakout groups for a brief time, where you can discuss, your own interface and experience with this topic, or any questions that you'd like to ask when we share out. So I will go ahead and reconstruct the breakout rooms again and invite all of you to join. I know we have a number of people who have joined only now with this last presentation, so please feel free to go into the groups and share. And I also invite you to turn on your cameras so that you can interact within those groups. We need to hear back from the groups, as we have been doing all day today in the 3 breakout sessions we've done. So our goal here is to wrap up at in about 5 or 6 minutes, because as we said before, those of you who are in the room who would like to have your free book, as well as for our information in terms of evaluating this session, there will be an evaluation form. It's very quick to fill out, which will allow you to choose the book and confirm your mailing address. So let me quickly just begin with asking for group 1, which I will name Abra, Erica, Gia, Lauren, and Vivian, if anyone wants to share a reflection from your breakout session.
Hi, my name's Gia. I'm one of Dr. Bond's pre-service students. I was gonna say something in the breakout room, but we got cut off before I was able to say anything. But one of the 2 ladies that were in there, they were saying like they were talking based off of like how they weren't aware of like the information, like learning in the school systems and things. And as an aspiring teacher, I feel like it's very important like for us to start introducing like these new stories and cultures into our classrooms. So I really appreciated like this entire event, like knowing the different cultures that we can use and like brainstorming ideas of what I wanted to do in my classroom in the future. So I just wanted to say that. And I just appreciate listening to what they were saying in the breakout room.
Thank you very much. Anyone else from room 1? Okay, then we go to room 4. Anaya Boone Douglas, Ashlyn, Brianna, Gillian, Lisa Tucker, Mariel Herzog, and Sarah Sills was part of that group.
I think that I can talk a little bit. I really like hearing the insight from everybody on a common theme that I've picked up on during the seminar today about how we can break these stereotypes and generalizations within our own students, and ways to expose them to different cultures so that we can combat those generalizations. And I just want to say that I'm very thankful for this, and especially the group I was just in, with the great insight into how we can do that in our current and future classrooms. So this has been quite a learning experience for me, and I can't wait to get my hands on these books.
Thank you very much. Anyone else from that group like to say something? It must have been quite a lively conversation. Lisa?
Nothing else to add. It was a great discussion.
Okay, thank you. Room 5 is Edith, Jada, Mariah, Rhonda, and Yasmin.
Just mentioning how, especially just elementary level, how to introduce these topics to my students and exposing them more to different cultures that goes on. Social studies, we mostly focus on the state that we live in. So it'd be nice to kind of get more cultural
Working together with the school system, with develop everyone to get more.
I think we lost Mariah.
Sorry, I was just saying how it would be, since I teach elementary, just exposing the kids to different countries and cultures, because we focus mostly on the state that we live in for social studies. So it'd be nice to kind of get them more exposed to what else is out there that surrounds them.
Okay, thank you so much. Room 6 is Autumn, Candace, and Tawfiq. Anyone want to raise? Candace, go ahead.
Yes, hello everyone. So I was very pleased again. I was with Autumn, who's a student, because I like to hear, their intention, because the younger generation is going to bring forth new ideas, innovations to teaching. And then Tawfiq, who was a teacher in a not so liberal state. I work in Prince George's, Maryland. So I would like to hear what they say, but basically just the same theme throughout the session today is that it's very, very important both for us as educators and for our students to see that there are many perspectives and to value them and to introduce some of them to encourage them to think outside the box.
And indeed, multiple perspectives appreciation and being able to work with them is one of basically across the whole United States, one of the valued skills that are at the foundation of social studies and language arts. 8, Dia, Professor Bond was in that group, Reginelle, and Tamira.
Really had a good session. I'll start off. One pre-service teacher made a really impactful comment that she felt it was really important to hear about these issues. She wasn't well versed in these issues because they're never taught anything in K through 12 education about this. And so they wanted to learn more. One particular person there was a former teacher, now hospital chaplain, wanted to know a little bit more about the book. It'd be great if we could see the cover. And so anyone else from that group, feel free to jump in. Oh, you did show the cover. It's beautiful. Thank you. Anyone else from the group, please feel free.
Okay, I'm going to have to move on. If again, you can raise your hand if I missed you. Room 9, Ahlam, Jacob, Patty, and Vernon.
One of the things we talked about in the group is kind of teaching kind of the accurate history, because I also brought up the fact that I kind of didn't learn about any of this growing up. But then it came down to how to actually communicate the severity of these things. Because I think it's easy to, we were talking about how it's easy to just say, oh, this happened, it's history, but it's not actually history. These are actual real things, like almost kind of nightmare scenarios. And you're talking about how, unless you're living these events, you can't always portray that easily. We were talking about how traveling and kind of living in these areas is kind of necessary to actually understand what was going on. So it was just kind of making me think about that and kind of what we were talking about in the group.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else from there? I wanted to mention also that Nora Lester Murad was actually in a gathering we did in Montgomery County Public Schools just 2 days ago, and I can share the tape of her presentation. Extremely helpful in talking about providing this balanced view. Okay, last group is Krista Johnson, Rosalind, and Talia.
Well, Rosalind probably wants me to speak.
Yes, I do.
we started our conversation, but I think the gist of it maybe, or what would be interesting for the larger group is I'm a professor at Howard, so we were really talking about the interconnections also of the histories of African American history and kind of this Jewish and Palestinian history, and and I'm not a K through 12 teacher, but that might be one way. I was talking about how certainly that's my kind of entree into understanding some of this history. And that might be, I don't know, useful for K through 12 students, because especially just understanding the history of Howard. Of course, it's understood as an HBCU, and I think many people just assume that it's always just Black people who were there. But in fact, as Rosalind and I were, discussing, we had a number of very prominent Jewish scholars who taught at Howard in the 1930s and 40s when, they were as discriminated against as others. So there's some interesting synergies there that might be able to, even if you're not teaching, because I don't teach about the Middle East, but there's some interesting synergies or ways in which you could bring in that subject matter while also talking about African-American history.
And also, let me just throw in, I just love talking to you, Chris. It was wonderful. There's a section in the history chapter that I wrote in our book about African-American and, Black leaders and organizations supporting Palestine for decades and decades. I mean, from, W.E.B. Du Bois, you were talking about Ralph Bunche, the Black Panthers were one of the first to come out supporting Palestine, Malcolm X. So there's a lot there, and we tried to document it in the book.
Great.
Thank you very much. I'm very conscious that we're 2 minutes in overtime. Edith, if you just have a brief statement. I have also posted into the chat the evaluation form, which, as I said, is also a way to confirm both your attendance and your choice of which of the books you would like to have shipped to you from our Howard University and Georgetown University bookstores.
Yes.
So Edith, please.
Sure. I just wanted to say quickly that there was an article recently about HBCUs having art museums and how that's important to, telling the story. My museum at the Smithsonian not too long ago featured the Caravans of Gold, where we distinctly highlighted not just these beautiful art pieces, but spoke about the historical connections between, African peoples and Muslim peoples based on trade that was going on years and years ago. So museums or art spaces or art are another way of making those kinds of connections for people. And I'm hoping that this recent article will encourage a lot of HBCUs to open their galleries and open their doors to, the history that continues to connect all of us, the African diaspora.
It would be great if you put the link to that article in the chat before we go, and then I'll move it onto the teacher resource page. So I want to thank Sarah and Rosalind very warmly for their presentation today, for your presence. I want to thank all of you for being here today. Forgive us for any little glitches here and there. And I would like to turn it over then to my colleagues, Professor Helen Bond and Brenda Randolph, for closing.
Well, again, thank you so much for being here. We always look forward to this time of the year when Susan and Helen and I know it was just by accident we met one day at an office, and we decided to do this. And so we've been doing it, since 2015. Yeah. We hope that you will visit our various websites and explore all the resources that we have available to you. On the website that Susan has created, you will see a link to the resources that I have provided for Listen Layla. That is constantly changing as I'm updating it, but we invite you to explore that. And please connect with us, get our newsletter, and we wish you have a wonderful Saturday afternoon. Helen?
Just a quick thank you. Thank you to all the presenters, all the authors, and our listening and viewing audience. I love books, and I love forums like this. It's great that it was interactive. And a special thank you to my students for working really hard in all their classes. They're young people, pre-service teachers, and they took their time out and they really contributed greatly. And so a thank you to them and a thank you to you all, and have a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much. I really enjoyed this and appreciate you guys.
Oh, before we go, I'm having trouble connecting with my phone, and I'm trying to connect with my computer so I can enter the chat. I can't see the chat on my phone. Just a quick question. Will you be awarding any attendance information so I could possibly use these hours as professional development in my district?
We will, if you email one of us at the connection that got you to the registration here, I'll be happy to provide, whatever information we have.
Great, thank you.
Just a quick reminder that the evaluation is in the chat, and it's through the evaluation that you select the book that you want and your address. So do please take time to do that.
And also because this program is subject to reporting so that the grant continues, that allows you to get these books and hear these speakers. And we need to know how you found it, and any comments that you want to make or any suggestions that you have.